Okay, Mayor Stevens, we are now live.
Great. Thank you. Welcome everyone to this East Lansing City Council regular meeting on Tuesday, June 8th. Will the clerk please call the roll, keeping in mind our new rules regarding virtual meetings?
Councilmember Babcock.
Present, attending from Oscoda Charter Township, County of Iosco, State of Michigan.
Councilmember Bacon.
Present, attending virtually, East Lansing, Michigan, Clinton County.
Councilmember Watson.
Here attending virtually, East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
I'm here attending virtually from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Mayor Stevens.
President attending virtually from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County. Great. We are on to our next item, which is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion for this? All right, Councilmember Babcock.
I move we approve the agenda with one change, which would be the omission of item 4.9.
Great. I'll second that. Great. Any discussion on this? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Great. We are now on to communications, and I'm going to take approval of the minutes. This is the regular council meeting minutes from May 25th. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, I'll look for a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Bacon, seconded by the Mayor Pro Tem. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Great. We are now on to communications. I'm going to take a point of privilege to talk about something that's really important that we have on our agenda today, to maybe give a little bit of context for folks as we go forward. So today we have a special presentation from our study committee on an independent police oversight commission. This has been work that has been happening for 3 years now, maybe even a little bit more in this city. It is extremely important, and I am proud to be at this place. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of this so folks can have some context, especially before we get into communications from the audience. So today we're going to see a presentation. This has been work that has been happening incredibly so by our staff and a group of extremely dedicated members of this study committee, and it deserves to be respected as such. So what we're going to do today is we're going to hear a presentation, and we're going to hopefully ask questions as a council after, but we're not going to be discussing it today. And the reason for that is because this is an extremely important policy, arguably one of the most important policies that we will pass as a council, or hopefully will pass as a council. And it deserves the respect that that dictates. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hear a presentation. We're going to let it digest for a week, let the public understand it, give some time. And then next week during our discussion only meeting, hopefully that gets passed on our consent agenda and that change is made. We're going to discuss it a little bit more in depth as a council and be able to hear from constituents during that time. This is an order. This is a really, really important policy. And then hopefully after we do that discussion, we'll be seeing some type of passage of an ordinance and resolution in the future. I have spoken to the chair of that commission, Chuck Grigsby, who has indicated that somebody will be available at that discussion only meeting as well as our staff to answer questions. But I do want to note that this presentation is really, really important. We need to respect those folks that have put in all this time and effort. And I want to make sure that the community also has the ability to digest really what is happening here, which is really, really significant. So I wanted to make that note before we get into communications. Thanks. Next item is 2.1, and it is just kind of an announcement that all written communications received by the council are on the online agenda packet. You'll see a link to written communication and then an add-on for one communications. We are now on to communications from the audience. Emily will let in callers. We have a number of folks wanting to speak today. You will be let in, you'll be told to unmute. You'll have 5 minutes to speak to the council. If you do have questions for the council as a whole, I will wait until the end of your time to respond to those. And unless council members have an individual question for you, we're gonna cut folks off at that 5-minute mark. So appreciate everybody that called in, and I will get started. Emily.
Caller with the phone number ending in 169, you are now permitted to address council.
Caller with the phone number ending in 169, if you hit *6 on your phone, you should be able to unmute and speak to the council on any issue you'd like.
Hi, this is Nancy Marr with Prime Housing Group. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'll be brief. I'm calling with regards to the ordinance with the 150 days on the lease agreements for East Lansing. And I just have 2 additional thoughts in addition to what I sent emails on before. One is how crucial it is that all municipalities, including MSU, be involved in this, or it will be a disproportionate punishment for East Lansing landlords. My second comment is with regards to, I know that the intention of this is to try to lower the stress level for future residents. But it's interesting because I think this is actually going to end up raising the stress level, and this is why. We have a house with a lease start date of August 1st. We have apartments with lease start dates of August 25th. So August 1st, August 25th, very similar products, 2 products that people would consider when they're looking for housing for the fall. But one product can go on the market 25 days in advance of the other product. And as a result, a resident is going to be put in a position where they can't make a accurate comparison between those 2 products to decide what is the best housing for them between those 2 products. And it's going to cause a tremendous amount of confusion when these residents are like, wait, I want to take a look at that, but you're saying that I can't compare it to this, and now I feel pressure to sign something because if I don't sign for the August 1st, I'm going to lose it, and I don't get to make a good comparison with your August 25th product. So I understand the intentions, but I think there's going to be unintended consequences like that. And I really ask that you table the issue, take a pause, and wait for the sophomore live-on requirement and the COVID world requirement. I mean, you're closing streets for the restaurants. It's harsh. This is a really harsh thing for the rental community in the midst of recovering from COVID and such. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate everybody I've had a chance to speak to with on this. And I do ask that you take a pause and table the issue to give us a chance to figure out how these other market factors are in play. Thank you so much.
Any council members have questions? All right, I do have one question. Nancy, thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your insight as always on this issue. You mentioned a little bit about the discrepancy between a start date of August 1st and August 22nd on your own individual, or sorry, 25th on your own individual properties. If something like this were to go into place, from a business perspective, wouldn't you want to have the full range of those products available to market at the same time? Would that be something that you would actually consider changing then if something like this would be to put into place?
No, the house it's a house that has a lease start date of August 1st. And houses are, okay, the way that we can effectively turn over to 150 apartments in 10 days is because we do it in a bit of an assembly line, and the houses take a little bit more effort. So we have specifically made those houses available August 1st to separate them from when we turn over the rest of our apartments. And so, no, we specifically don't line those dates up. And yet they are very competing products. DTN has a 10-month lease that goes August 1st to May 31st, but they also have other leases that start later on in August. All of these products are comparable products that are that somebody considers. So it's not like somebody considers only an August 1st start date versus only an August 25th. So I hope that answers your question.
That did. Thank you very much. All right.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Yep, of course. Emily, would you mind letting me caller?
Caller with the phone number ending in 240, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, my name is Diane Wing, 1024 Huntington Road. Calling in regards to an item that's been brought up a couple of times on council meetings. First, on April 13th by Councilmember Watson, when she brought up the issue of motorcycles. I was actually listening into that meeting, and I just about came out of my chair with excitement when it was actually mentioned, the problem of motorcycles. And then I also listened to comments from a neighbor, Mr. Worth, who lives on West Grand River, at your last meeting on May 25th. And I'm just here to keep this issue alive because it's not going away and it's going to continue to get worse as summer progresses. We have the motorcycle issue. As Mr. Worth mentioned, we also have the issue with very loud cars that have modified their mufflers. So it sounds, when they're driving their car, it sounds as though gunfire is going off. It's my understanding that these are either called shotgun mufflers or machine gun mufflers. And the first time I ever heard one, I literally thought shots were being fired on Grand River. We have 2 cars that I'm aware of that go up and down Grand River that have that particular type of muffler. So it's not just motorcycles, it's also these loud modified cars. And the fact that there's no longer any deterrent on West Grand River by the East Lansing Police Department, let alone enforcement. I don't even care if we had enforcement on West Grand River. If we just had patrol cars that could take a break and take 5 or 10 or 20 minutes to park along West Grand River anywhere west of Harrison Road to Coolidge Road, so that the people who are racing up and down Grand River at least know that East Lansing Police Department is paying attention. As of right now, they can do this with impunity because they know they're not going to get caught. There is no longer any consistent police presence on West Grand River to monitor traffic any longer. As soon as the speed limit went up to 35 miles an hour, like 5 or 7 years ago, it's as though the East Lansing Police Department packed up their citation pads and they moved off of West Grand River. We don't get any enforcement of speed any longer. Now we've added motorcycles. Now we've added these, what I'm going to call these shotgun mufflers, and it's awful. I'm coming up on being a resident right off of Grand River. My home is one house off of Grand River. I'm not on Grand River, but I'm directly next to it by one house. I'm coming up of being a 23-year resident on Grand River, off of Grand River, and it's the worst it's ever been. I now have to wear earplugs when I go out to work in my backyard because my backyard is closer to Grand River. And think about that a resident cannot enjoy their backyard without wearing earplugs. There are times I also have to wear earplugs at night. In the summer when I'd like to sleep with my windows open, that's really not a possibility anymore. Earplugs have to be used. It was mentioned on the May 25th call that the thought was that by closing 2 lanes of Albert Avenue, it's going to greatly reduce the motorcycle problem on Albert Avenue. I'm here to tell you that Grand River has got to have more of an issue than Albert Avenue does. We have to do something about Grand River. Let's face it, a lot of the motorcycles that are racing on Albert Avenue, they're getting to Albert via Grand River or Saginaw. Please, please, can we have police presence on West Grand River in the evening? A dream would be if we had it all day long, because we also have construction traffic that starts at 8 o'clock, ends at 4:30 every Monday through Friday. The construction traffic is headed towards downtown. I mean, you build buildings, the construction materials have to get there. Well, they pass down West Grand River in order to get there. So please, could we please speak with the police chief about figuring out how to deploy more traffic patrol along West Grand River? Thank you.
Thank you. And the beautiful thing about one of these council meetings is that I can ask our wonderful police chief, who is right here, to speak on the issue a little bit, and then maybe speak, because this is obviously, and I appreciate you calling in about this. This has been an issue that we've talked about very frequently. Councilmember Watson's brought it up. A number of council members have brought it up, and the downtown issue has been very apparent, and we've obviously gotten a lot of feedback, including yourself now, from other surrounding areas that have faced this issue. So Chief, do you have a response?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the caller who called in on that. We are addressing those issues as we speak. We are the motorcycle issues that throughout the whole city on Hagedorn, downtown, and on the West Grand River. We have identified that as a major problem and a major concern for the quality of life of people in our community. And we are actively monitoring those areas. And unfortunately, though, we can't be there 24 hours a day, but we are, as one of our areas that we are monitoring because of the complaints that people have brought to our attention. The speeds have gone up. The speeds have gone up with the change in speed signs, but that's not one of these things for us not to be in that area. And we were there a couple weeks ago, and another resident shooed us away from the area because he was not happy with the police in general, and he didn't like he wasn't a big gun advocate. He didn't think the police should be in his neighborhood because that we had guns in our cars and things of that nature. And we addressed that individual and told him what we were trying to do, but we just have to find we got to find a couple of better locations where we set up and monitor that traffic. Those motorcycles are extremely troublesome, and those modified mufflers, I know exactly what you're saying, ma'am, because I was right behind one before up on Lake Lansing Road over the weekend, and you can tell, that they're modified. They didn't come from the factory and things like that. And so we're on those issues, and we're going to do our best to try and address those issues throughout the city, especially on West Grand River, because that has come up a couple of different times, and we're going to do our best. If you know of an area where we can sit or anything like that without being a nuisance to the other neighbors who don't want the police there, we'll be more than happy to find where those areas are.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Councilmember Babcock. Thank you,
Thank
Chief.
you. Thank you. Speaking from life experience, I would guess that there's speeding going on with the motorcycles on the cars. It's not just the noise on the street legal, I'm guessing. But even if there's not, do we have a noise ordinance that we can enforce?
We have more of a noise ordinance when it comes to the muffler system, when it comes to like a decibel
Right.
thing with motor vehicles and things like that. There is something on the books with that. The noise ordinance from the ones that we've written in the city for parties, Mr. Homie probably can help us with that, but we don't tend to write that noise ticket with vehicles. We have gone under the motor vehicle with decibels, but we're in the process of trying to figure out how we're going to buy some different decibel instruments to gauge that kind of activity and things like that. I think we have one only, and we're trying to figure out how, because normally it just picks up all the area noise, and we can't find the one that's actually could pinpoint one particular vehicle and things like that. So we're looking into how we're going to find the right instruments to identify the cars that are making the extra noise.
Okay. Is that something we'd need to write? And perhaps that's both for the chief and also for Mr. Homier.
So let me jump in because the Michigan Vehicle Code is very specific when it comes to noise in vehicles, and talks about certain decibel limits measured from 50 feet away in various different vehicles. So it's difficult, but I will say when it comes to this issue, the problem that we have is the preemption issue, because there's actually a provision, and it's under 257.707 small e. And part of that says this act occupies the whole field of vehicle noise regulation. A city, county, village, or township shall not adopt or enforce vehicle noise rules unless the rules are identical to the requirements of this act. So while you could write a local ordinance for your officers to write, it would have to be identical to the act. And so then you can certainly gauge for yourself whether that's a proper policy to do when your officers could write it under state law as it is.
Sorry, that brought back memories of a client who was violating the vehicle code by noise at 2 a.m. and things went downhill from there. That's right. Our local control legislature strikes again. Well, if there's anything we can do, perhaps Mr. Homier or Chief Johnson would let us know. And I'm 6 or 7 houses up from Saginaw and I hear it. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the caller coming in. Chief Johnson, Mr. Homier, thank you guys for chiming in as well. It sounds like the issue is well in our heads and that there are going to be some actions in the future to try and address it. Appreciate
Thank you all.
Yeah. Emily, do you mind letting the next caller?
Caller with the phone number ending in 514, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, this is Matt Hagan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Thanks. Just calling in to speak about Ordinance 1500. I have briefly read the revised ordinance with the extra ramp, I guess is what we're calling it. Apologize, people already spoken about this. I'm just recently getting on the call, but don't feel at this point that revision is quite adequate. It doesn't include Michigan State, which is obviously the biggest player around. Also, Bath and Lansing Township are not added on there. So I think we need to take some time and add to that exit ramp potentially, and only consider this if they are part of the discussion. Also, really feel that this ordinance is going to make it more confusing for the students, create more stress for them. There'll be houses where the lease ends in July. There'll be houses where leases end in May. There'll be houses that lease in early August, some late August. So it's just going to add a lot of confusion for them going through the rental process. Why can't I rent this house? Why can I rent this house? It's one, it's not a problem, and two, it's just going to create more conflict and stress for the students. So very much opposed to it, and happy to answer any questions if we're able to do that. But that's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Hagan. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Hagan.
Thank you.
Caller with a phone number ending in 552, you are now permitted to address council.
Good evening, Kath Edsel, 1026 Daisy Lane. I want to start by saying my comments sort of reflect what you said, Mayor Stevens, and I appreciate your comments that you made about the presentation that will be happening later this evening. Several years ago, East Lansing police officer James Campbell was part of a panel that was covering policing in East Lansing. He suggested the creation of an oversight committee. His comments started the ball rolling. Unfortunately, it's been a very long and serpentine route to get to tonight. In the meantime, numerous community members have been subjected to unacceptable and oftentimes racially motivated treatment by the East Lansing Police Department without any serious means to demand or receive accountability. So here we are. It's been about a year since council moved forward a resolution to create the committee who will present to you tonight. While I've not read every word in the document they have created, I have used my own education, especially guidance from NACOLE, which is the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, as well as my family's experiences with the East Lansing Police Department, to look for the most important parts in the document regarding an oversight committee. And they're all there. The committee must be proactive, independent, empowered, individualized, transparent, and an iterative process. The question tonight and moving forward is, does this council respect the work and the time commitment put into these recommendations, especially as it relates to what are, to me, the three most important parts? One, using the recommended ordinance language in the document. These individuals have given their heart and soul to understanding what is needed. If you turn this over to the city attorney or the city manager to write the ordinance, you've made a mockery of the whole process. If there are contract or policy issues, change the contracts or the policy, not the recommended ordinance from this committee. Two, the oversight committee must be separate from the police department. If the committee is housed in City Hall, then independence is lost, and so is trust and any facade of transparency. And three, once created, the committee must receive every document, every video, every interview, and access to every witness that is relevant to any situation the Oversight Committee deems worthy of study. This should not simply be a committee to put another set of eyes on citizens' complaints, but a committee to look at practices such as police use of force as well as policies. This police department has a history of lying, hiding documents and testimony, not turning on body cameras, as well as creating police reports that fit their narrative. The only effective way for an oversight committee to have any teeth is to have subpoena power or the policy equivalent. As I've said before, an oversight committee will not solve East Lansing's or any community's issues with police brutality, racial profiling, lying, etc. This council will need to continue to work on those issues not covered by an oversight committee. However, the oversight committee recommended following 7 months of tireless work of this committee is absolutely necessary if we are ever to achieve anything resembling fairness, justice, and accountability in our police department. Thank you all very much for the time that I know you're going to put into this. I appreciate all the hard work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. Any questions for the caller? Thank you. Emily, you can move on to the next. Thanks.
Caller with the phone number ending in 774, you are now permitted to address council.
Hello, David Pearson. I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. I'm here this evening on behalf of Hagen Realty, DTN, Crone Management, Prime Housing, and some of the other landlords you've heard from. And at the risk of being repetitious, I guess I wanted to emphasize some of the points they've made in conversations with you and at prior meetings, as well as written communications. The area that Ann Arbor, which has been the model for this ordinance that's proposed, covers, the market area really does include East Lansing, Meridian, Lansing Township, Bath, and most particularly MSU. And that's why it's important that if the ordinance were to be adopted, that it include all of them as being part of the conversation and part of whatever decision is made on how to regulate lease terms. There are different issues, as both Nancy Marr and Matt Hagen said again tonight, for different housing types, different lease arrangements by bed, by bedroom, by apartment, by house, and different lease start dates. And part of the problem here is that the timing of the proposal is extraordinary. There are another 1,000 beds that are about to come into the market, added to the hundreds that have been added in the last 2 years by the Landmark, the Hub, and the Abbott. And the housing study that you've commissioned has already, in its preliminary report, pointed to that as a big issue for the city to deal with. On top of that, COVID first dramatically reduced vacancies when MSU closed its campus with 2 weeks' notice. Since then, it's dramatically increased vacancies as students wondered whether they were coming back and where they might be living and whether they should commit to a lease for the longer term, which has to have made a big difference for this year in particular in terms of when students are signing leases for the coming year. That was combined with MSU's announcement that sophomores are going to live on campus. If anything, that should present an opportunity for looking at what difference those things make to the market and then discussing what is the difference in terms of how it's worked and how it worked in the past. A chance to talk to property owners as well as MSU and other local governments to see what the issue is. And then I guess I really have to caution that it's not easy to plan to make the market do what one might wish it to. East Lansing's history has included the East Village zoning, which, to be perfectly blunt, effectively stopped any redevelopment in Cedar Village, which became the East Village, for probably 15 years until at least some of the rules were changed and the hub was built. The diversity requirement of 25% in the downtown has given us, well, frankly, a senior housing project that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and possibly some affordable housing that's not here yet. The experience hasn't been good in substituting planning for the market in those senses. And so that, I think, should give us all some pause to say, let's talk about what differences could be made in terms of working with students directly, working with MSU directly, instead of saying, well, MSU's never going to agree to anything that we want. And those are the sorts of things that should happen before an ordinance like this should really be considered. And I would urge you to do that before taking any other action on ordinance 1500. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Any questions for the caller? I'm not seeing any. Emily, you can move on to the next.
I just wanted to state for the record, I believe I said 774. I meant to say 744. So
I think you got it.
Thank you. I did.
oops. Okay. And caller with the phone number ending in 806, you are now permitted to address council.
Caller ending in 806. If you hit *6 on your phone, you should be able to unmute and speak to the council for 5 minutes on any issue. One more time, caller with the phone number ending in 806. If you do wish to speak to the council, you can hit *6 on your phone, unmute, and speak to the council for 5 minutes.
Hello?
Yep.
There we go. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Darcy Whidden, and I am calling on behalf of Whidden Properties. The few points that I'd like to make, and I don't want to be repetitive as we brought up many of these points before, but one of my first main ones is I believe that we should leave this up to Michigan law to dictate if there's a need for additional regulation on rental housing timelines for renting and things like that. The other matter that I would say is that if we're talking about from an educational standpoint, there's sufficient information out there for the students to learn about being better tenants. I think what we need to do is just have the ability for them to come to that information easier, working with the MSU to get the information out to teach people to become better renters. So like I said, it's not necessarily that they are bad renters or anything like that. They just need to know more about what they're getting involved in, and we have that information available to them. And then the two final points, which we've been over several times, is that this must include all jurisdictions around us. I sent a letter which kind of touched upon that matter a bit more, but this is so important. If we don't include everyone, I believe in the Tri-County area really, because there's students are housed throughout the area, this will not be fair to the East Lansing landlords. And then finally, obviously, timing is of great importance here. Things have been changing in the past 2 years that we've never foreseen. What we need to do now is just make sure that we make the right decision at the right time. Now is not the right time. Maybe we come back to this at a future date when things have, kind of figured out, pandemic's done, sophomore requirement, implemented. We can make the proper decisions at the right times, but this I do not believe is the right time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? Let's say none, I'll move on. And I just wanted to note, a lot of these are on ordinance 1500. I'm going to try and address a lot of them when we get to that item. I don't want to respond to every individual caller just because we do have a lot of callers on the list today. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. I appreciate the call though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Caller with the phone number ending in 963, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, this is Alice Trigger. Two brief items and then the thing I actually intended to call about. One is, I believe Councilmember Babcock removed an item from the agenda that went by quickly and without explanation, and I think it was the mural, and we've already assigned a reporter on that. So I would love to know what got removed and why. Secondly, with regard to Diane Wing's call and previous callers on the noise issue, my understanding from looking at East Lansing's Code of Ordinances is that section 44-200 has a whole section on noise from vehicles. And so if I understood the city attorney correctly, which is we don't have the power to do that unless we exactly match the state law, somebody probably needs to look at that part of our law and fix it. But we already have a law regarding vehicle noise, as I understand it. It gives specific decibel levels regarding specific distance away. So if it's out of date, it needs to be corrected. If it's not out of date, there's a local law that actually can be used. We don't have to use a state law if the police want to use it. The main thing I was calling about was regarding transparency. I appreciate that this time around the communications packet was in the packet as it normally is. Thank you for that. It was even in the packet 2 hours before the meeting, which made it a lot easier to prepare for the meeting in terms of reading the background. However, this packet, as well as the Transportation Commission packet from last night, had communications that showed an icon for an attachment, but not the actual attachment and not an actual link for the attachment, which meant those of us who are not on the inside cannot actually see what was attached. For Transportation Commission, it was a communication from ASMSU regarding a bill regarding protected bike lanes. So I contacted the community liaison for ASMSU, and she sent me the actual bill, which was super interesting to me, and I'm glad I didn't miss it because it was actually a pretty fascinating bill from ASMSU. So in the future, staff should note that when they attach these things that have just an icon in the PDF, that we really need the print off as well in the communications package. Today, this happened with a communication from Darcy Whidden, where I think there were 2 attachments, and both of them just showed up as icons, so it's not possible for those of us looking at the communications packet in those instances to see what was actually conveyed to council. I'd asked before for a quarterly status litigation report, and I just wanted to give you some background on that because it persists in not existing. And I don't think it's just not existing for us in the public. My sense is that council's not getting that. I discovered the existence of this rather by accident when the previous city attorney let drop that they were meeting in closed session to discuss a written quarterly status litigation report. I had never before that point known that it was in writing. And the fact that it was in writing meant that it was able to FOIA it. So I did FOIA it. I was denied the entire thing. It was completely redacted under attorney-client privilege, including redacting the name and address of the city attorney, which I apparently was not allowed to know, which, needless to say, I knew who the city attorney was. So I contacted Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press in Washington, D.C., and they gave a very eloquent statement after looking at this and sort of guffawing at it, and said that, as is correct, and I'm sure Mr. Homier and Ms. Babcock could explain this, attorney-client privilege is actually a fairly narrow thing. And Reporters Committee also went on to state very clearly that the city attorney works for the city, which means he works for the public, and he's paid with public dollars. To the greatest extent possible, we the people should be able to know what our city attorney is doing on our behalf. There are some circumstances where that is not in our best interest. And the most classic example of that is, for example, when the city attorney is helping, for example, to bid on the purchase of a piece of land. And it's important that we not indicate publicly what our maximum bid price is. But in most circumstances, when there's not some high tension litigation, it is the case that the people can be let know what exactly is being done in their names. And the lack of a quarterly status litigation report means we can't easily know what's going on. Yes, we can search all of the court records. I can take donor dollars and pay people to have to search all of the court records, but it's frankly easier if there's a quarterly status litigation report. When the entire thing was redacted, I appealed, and Mr. Meadows had to agree that it was absurd to redact even the name and address of the city attorney, and he understood the narrow reading of attorney-client privilege. And Mr. Meadows actually ruled that we were able to see almost all of the quarterly status litigation report. And once that started, it became much easier for us to follow
30
what was
seconds
going on
remaining.
in the name of the people. So, for example, we're not able to see what's going on with the case where the mayor's texts have been FOIA'd. There are potentially other cases going on that we don't know about. And some of these things may well have effect on the kinds of things you're considering on the table before you. So I think it's really important that we push for that, and I would ask that you push for that in the name of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will, my bad, I muted myself. I will go to Councilmember Babcock because she had a question, I believe. Go ahead.
No, it wasn't a question so much as an answer. We received an email this afternoon from Wendy Wilmer's Longpre saying that she was requesting that we remove item 4.9, which would be the approval of a contract with Ndubuisi Okoye. I'm sorry, I'm probably not pronouncing that properly. That it be removed from this evening's council agenda because there are outstanding issues regarding mural installation methods that they need to resolve before issuing the contract. So that seemed to me to be a reasonable a reasonable reason for putting off ratifying the contract. So that was simply my response. Probably should have said it in the motion, but there you have it.
Thanks. And then I'm gonna do a couple of things. Emily, did you want to speak to the PDF issue from before?
Absolutely. Last week or 2 weeks ago when we had a council meeting, I was notified during the meeting by Mayor Stevens that the written communication was not showing up. There was a technical difficulty and it was up by 7:50 p.m. During the meeting. And it is normally up before the meetings every week, and the written communication is cut off after 4:00 p.m. every meeting. So it is typically on a few hours before the meeting. There's technical difficulties with how large the file was being entered and it wasn't showing up.
Okay, thank you for that. And I appreciate you being able to respond quickly. Obviously, it's really, really important that written communication is on there. Mistakes will happen every once in a while. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. And then in regards to the quarterly status litigation report, I do think that it's good to have council receive that. And I'll have to look back a little bit on what Mayor Meadows at the time had said regarding the issue, but I'll just put out a statement now and request that Mr. Homier and I and maybe another member of council get together and figure out, sure, Councilmember Babcock, get together and figure out how we can get that to the council in an effective way. And maybe if we can have a version that might be available to the public as well. That way we increase the transparency on the issue. All right, thank you. Emily, would you mind letting the next caller?
Austin Grandin, you are now permitted to address council.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin Miller Grandin, at 205 East Grand River Avenue. I'm a third year at Michigan State University, and I study social relations and policy through James Madison and philosophy through the College of Arts and Letters, where I'm also the proud representative of said college in ASMSU. I'm here today to show my support for Ordinance 1500 on behalf of the students of Cal and other fellow Spartans who have had to endure mental exhaustion because of the short-term frame many of us are given when it comes to where we are living the following year if we are to continue our studies at Michigan State University. As a freshman, I was given the ultimatum, like so many other students, to choose if I wanted to continue living in the dorms or decide to live in an apartment the following year, and that was in October. With this came the decision to choose whom I want to live with, not knowing well enough if I could handle living with them for an entire year. As a result, I quickly found my group of fellow students and fought to find a place to stay the following year before they were all taken up. What transpired afterwards, however, in this decision, I believe was a direct result of the short period new adults are being given for decisions we are not ready to make so quickly. As the year progressed, I found myself in a toxic situation with people I thought were my friends mentally abusing me. To top off the situation, I had an overwhelming realization that I signed a year-long lease with these very same people for the following year. As a victim of relationship abuse, I had no idea how I would begin to cope with this year fast approaching. When all of this anxiety, depression, and doubt came to the climax in March of my freshman year, I had a nervous breakdown, all resulting from a decision I had to make hastily to solidify where I would be living. Because of this burden, I was contemplating dropping out of school. I felt broken and lost and had no idea where to go. The same thing happened in fall of 2020, where I was rushed into living with people I didn't know were out to mentally hurt me as well, resulting in me having another nervous breakdown, having to move back home for a month, have to go to therapy, and somehow, by the grace of God, able to find a place back in East Lansing to move into by myself this time, only to then be told the very day after I moved in by leasing that I had to re-sign for the next year that very same day, or they'd be giving my lease to someone else. I had less than 24 hours to decide if I want to go through the motions again and find a place for my senior year, or choose to stay in the apartment I am currently in. The mental health of our community and individuals is severely overlooked, and Ordinance 1500 can be a stepping stone to help so many people. I'm here today relaying my story because it is a story I share with so many Spartans and people in general. Suppose my experiences can create a change so that others do not have to go through the same thing as I did. In that case, I'm willing to go more in depth and acknowledge the immense burden these expectations are forcing on my fellow Spartans. I know students come to MSU worldwide, and many of us don't even know what our lives are heading to even tomorrow. How can one expect new students in a foreign environment to make such an important decision with less than a month under their belt to begin with? I urge all of us to see Ordinance 1500 as a solution to a significant problem our community is facing. The mental health and overall well-being of all of those who consider East Lansing and the surrounding area home should be our top priority after the year we've all had to endure together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the caller? Seeing that, I'll just acknowledge Austin, I believe it was. Thank you for sharing your story. That must not have been the easiest thing in the world to do, especially in this public forum. And I'd just like to put out a number, 1-800-273-TALK. It's a suicide hotline. If you or a loved one is struggling at this point, I do encourage folks to reach out to help. I do appreciate you calling and sharing your experience, as that is not easy to do. So thank you. Emily, would you mind letting in this caller?
Aaron Iturralde, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Iturralde, 2599 Abbott Road, 48823. I'm currently a junior at Michigan State University, majoring in secondary education, social studies, and social relations and policy. I was the former ASMSU General Assembly representative for the College of Education, and currently am serving as the Vice President for Academic Affairs with the ASMSU, serving the almost 40,000 undergraduate students here. I'm here to support item 5.2, the resolution to adopt an ordinance that regulates the lease renewal process between landlords and tenants. As my fellow students have discussed this evening, this is an issue that has been impacting MSU students for decades. But as a student representative, we weren't really sure how to approach this until Brian Jeffries and David Myers, our ASMSU Student Legal Services, informed us of an ordinance that was very similar to the one on today's agenda that has been in place in Ann Arbor since 2006. Back then, U of M's Director of Communications for University Housing, Peter Logan, said this ordinance was passed in order to alleviate the pressures that many U of M students were feeling during their first weeks of school. Ann Arbor's current ordinance allows for a 70-day period, and this has been such a helpful policy for protecting students that they are now looking to expand further. The proposed 150-day period for East Lansing would let students like myself get at least one semester behind them before signing or renewing their lease, allowing them to make an exponentially more informed decision based on their college experience. Additionally, this timeframe allows students to go home for winter break to discuss things with their families, which is one of the vital perspectives for students to keep in mind, something that I wish I would have had an opportunity to do when I was re-signing my lease this year. I sincerely hope that you will pass this resolution to help students, parents, and the entire MSU community for years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? All right, Emily, would you mind letting in next? I think I need to be more clear in my speech. I am watching the captions right now, and I think it said, "I am all money and lux." And that is definitely not something I want to be quoted on. So I'm going to be a little bit more clear in my speech from now on. Apologize. Emily, would you? Thank you.
Ellie Bennett, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Ellie Bennett, 2597 Abbott Road, 48823. I'm currently a junior at Michigan State University studying international relations and global and international studies. I currently serve as the community liaison for ASMSU, which is the MSU student government. We serve about MSU's almost 40,000 undergrad students through our legislative body. And I'm here today to support item 5.2, Ordinance 1500. In 2017, the deputy city manager had stated in an article that it's reasonable to believe that 60% of East Lansing's population is students. If this is true, with a majority of the city's population being students, we need to be listening to said students. As you've heard and will continue to hear, this issue is a student one, and it's student-centered and always has been. I feel as though I've heard a lot of misconceptions about what this ordinance does. It protects students, plain and simple. What this ordinance doesn't do is not allow students to re-sign their lease at any time that they want before January. Students are welcome to do so if they feel comfortable and ready to do so. But if a student, after 1 month of living in an apartment, doesn't know what they want to do for an entire next year, they should not be penalized and should not be forced to make a decision ill-advised. This ordinance simply makes it so that landlords cannot rent out spaces until January. I would also like to point out the fact that I've heard from several different landlords and people within the city that the leasing period used to start in January or February. So it raises the question of why is it such a big issue to push back the leasing period into that time frame? Giving more times to students is never a bad thing. Students should be able to have more time to figure out their ever-changing lives, research, and find a place they feel comfortable living in. I hope that the council continues to listen to the student voices that have spoken and will hopefully continue to speak on this issue today. And thank you. And as always, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? Seeing none, I will move on.
Jordan Kovac, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Kovac. I use she, they pronouns. 1678 9 Chandler Road, 48823, and I'm a sophomore at MSU majoring in social relations and policy and secondary interdisciplinary social studies education. I'm the former ASMSU GA representative for the James Madison College, and I'm now the current ASMSU Vice President for Internal Administration. I'm here to speak on Ordinance 1500. On February 4th, 2020, I was the one who introduced ASMSU Bill 5762, which advocates for municipalities that contain MSU student rental housing to formally move back their lease signing periods. I've spoken on this before. However, I personally come from a poor background, but fortunately have the privilege of being able to receive Pell Grants that pay for my housing. However, I'm not given my financial aid statement for the next year until the second semester of the current year, which means that I could feasibly sign a lease in October, lose my scholarship by the next semester, and be stuck in a legally binding contract that my family can't afford to bail me out of or pay for on their own. Students come from all different backgrounds, and many of us are trying to figure out the world while making our own mistakes. We really don't need legally binding financial contracts that we're pressured to sign way too far in advance to be one of these mistakes we make. Further, new information that has come to light through my position as ASMSU's VP for Internal Administration is that this is something students have been asking for since most current college students were even born. In December of 2000, ASMSU proposed to City Council an almost identical leasing ordinance, besides wording, the only difference being that landlords would have to wait until 1/4 of the lease period had passed. In a letter to the former mayor, ASMSU's then Director of Community Affairs said, currently landlords in East Lansing begin showing their rental properties and signing leases as early as the month of October, approximately 10 months prior to a new lease term beginning in August. As such, if the existing tenants want to re-rent the premises for the next year, they must sign a new lease in October or lose it. Sounds a little familiar. This again was still an issue in 2004, when then ASMSU lawyer Jim Newton stated that many rental landlord problems that they were facing were due to contract renewals within the first 2 to 3 months of the school year, because students were asked to renew their contract before they fully understand what type of landlord that they're leasing from or their roommates. In 2008, both the ASMSU and RHA passed leasing ordinances once again to the City Council to push back the lease signing period, but this time to January 1st. The ASMSU Bill 4470 even noted that a later lease sign-up date would allow apartment complex staff and landlords more time with their current tenants to cater to their needs before having to worry about finding new people to fill the apartments. An opinion piece in the State News almost a decade ago in 2011 even says, with leases ready to be signed October 9th, students also have little time to comparison shop and find a location and a price that works for them. Later dates would compel property management companies to offer students more equitable prices because students would be more likely to find better deals with more time to shop around. Further, this article notes that it's not as if moving back the dates means fewer students will be looking to live off campus. In fact, giving their customers more time to make an informed decision seems like something property management companies should be interested in. Informed students are better tenants because they've had time to ensure the decision they're making is the right one. One way or another, you all campaigned on listening to students or being the catalyst city for change and not waiting for other cities to do it first. You campaigned on working closer with MSU to address student needs and noted that students were a key part in legislating in East Lansing. You admitted that you might not understand all the issues that face students, but you stated you wanted us to come to you with them. You stated that the best part of East Lansing is that the community is eager to address issues, leading to positive changes. Please stand by these statements. We've come to you for over 20 years now with this same issue. In 2001, when the first ordinance was brought to council, then council member Sam Singh stated, anytime we consider an ordinance like this, we usually take our time. Students have spent my entire lifetime championing for this specific ordinance. I think we can all agree that it is finally time to do something about it. Thank you for listening to us all tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? Thank you. I appreciate the background, actually. There was a little bit of knowledge that I didn't know about ASMSU back a couple decades ago. Very, very interesting. Emily, would you mind letting in the next caller?
Harsna Chahal, you are now permitted to address council.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Harshna Chahal. I'm calling from 1376 East Grand River Road, and I'm currently a junior at Michigan State University, dual majoring in human biology and neuroscience and minoring in computer science. And I'm here today to speak on Ordinance 1500, which is item 5.2 on today's agenda. I spent the past year living in an apartment with Prime Housing Group, and I remember the stress of first finding the apartment. I was only about a month into my freshman year of college, in the middle of getting used to my classes and being on campus. On top of all of this, I was already being pushed to find a roommate and somewhere to live for the following year. It felt so soon. I haven't even had my first exam before I started looking for an apartment. Being a first-generation Asian American, I had no understanding of how renting worked and had to figure it all out by myself. The resources available either steered me towards living on campus another year or signing a lease right on the spot. After being exposed to other leasing practices outside of East Lansing, the predatory nature of this practice has been revealed to me. The system is stacked against inexperienced and overwhelmed college students with an excess of student loans in their pocket and a predatory rental industry that is eager to take advantage of them. There's a better way. It shouldn't be easier to find a reasonable price and less predatory rental agreement in Chicago, where I'm currently living this summer, than a mid-sized college town like East Lansing. The same standards that we apply to the cities with the largest rental industries in the country should apply to East Lansing. It isn't a matter of over-accommodating students, but treating them like adults with the same respect that they would find if they weren't students in a college town. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? Not seeing any. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for calling in.
Natalie Kerwin, you are now permitted to address council.
Natalie Kerwin, if you unmute, you should be able to speak to the council for 5 minutes on any topic you'd like. One more time, Natalie Kerwin, you are in the room with council. If you unmute on your device, you should be able to talk to the council for 5 minutes on any issue. All right, Emily, would you mind going to the next caller? If I get an email or something regarding this caller, I will definitely go back to them.
Lorenzo Santavica, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, sorry. This is actually Georgia Frost. I believe that the name is coming up odd on my screen for some reason.
I believe you're coming up as the former student body president, so it's a good name to hold.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia Frost. I live at 1135 East Michigan Avenue, East Lansing. I am an incoming fourth-year student studying international relations and political theory and constitutional democracy. I am also the undergraduate student body president.
Oh, that makes sense. Sorry. No, my apologies for interrupting. Continue.
Okay. I am also the undergraduate student body president and ASMSU president at Michigan State. I am here tonight to speak in favor of East Lansing delaying its leasing season discussed in Ordinance 1500. The current leasing season is not responsive to student needs whatsoever. It pressures students into making a decision early on in the academic year, resulting in a contractual agreement that does not suit them. I have heard many personal testimonies from students who are not nearly experienced enough in their college career to make a decision like this so early on. This results in many unreliable roommate choices and a binding agreement that is not responsive to students' changing circumstances and the vast amount of time between when they sign their leases and when they actually move in. The leasing season timeline, as is, takes advantage of students' needs to procure housing and pressures them into a sense of urgency that is unnecessary and problematic, stopping students' chances for holistic research on what option is best for them. ASMSU's legislative branch, the General Assembly, has passed legislation similarly in favor of this change as referenced earlier, and I hope that those listening tonight are aware of what the student voice is on this and acts accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? Seeing none, thank you for being with us and congratulations on your election.
Ishan K. Modi, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Good evening. My name is Ishan Modi, 3850 Coleman Road, and I'm a rising third-year student at MSU. And I'm speaking on behalf of ASMSU as well as myself personally. And so I've been involved with ASMSU this past year. And so that capacity is something I really wanted to address in regards to Ordinance 1500 and policies like it. Students have been asking for policies like Ordinance 1500 in some capacity for quite a while. As a former representative for Lyman Briggs College in the ASMSU General Assembly, housing is a topic of continuous concern among students. And now I work as the state liaison in the Governmental Affairs Department of ASMSU. And this has kind of further opened my eyes to the complexity of this issue and how the cards are stacked against students. Personally speaking, the rapid nature of East Lansing leasing was really overwhelming to me my freshman year, and so I opted to stay on campus for my second year, although that plan was changed dramatically by COVID. I was not comfortable with signing a legally binding agreement with people I had just met. Many other folks share this concern, and it also affects landlords because it reduces their amount of potential consumers. And after all, MSU is instating a 2-year live-on requirement, and that just may tilt the balance in favor of on-campus university-sponsored options instead of off-campus housing. So I really do believe that this proposed change in Ordinance 1500 will positively impact people renting out units or properties, as well as students. We understand the decision that landlords and leasing companies have to make, but like I alluded to, market coercion does nothing but disincentivize students from off-campus housing. By putting students and those issuing leases on the same playing field, free competition in the housing market here in East Lansing will predominate. And so I ask the City Council to vote in favor of Ordinance 1500. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for the caller? All right, seeing none, I'll move on to the next.
Matt Apostle, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Apostle, 16789 Chandler Road. I'm a rising senior, which is weird to say, at Michigan State University. I'm majoring in social relations and policy, and I currently serve as the Vice President for Governmental Affairs with the Associated Students of Michigan State University, ASMSU, which is MSU student government. I am here to once again speak strongly in support of Ordinance 1500, which is the resolution to adopt an ordinance which regulates the lease renewal process between landlords and tenants. Tonight, you have been hearing, and I think we'll continue to be hearing, many students speak on their personal experiences in the rental market. The majority of these students have been speaking on the undue pressure they have faced at the beginning of each academic year to sign or re-sign their leases, and how much this ordinance would mean to them if passed. Despite this, however, myself as well as other members of ASMSU have received many complaints and, quite frankly, have been harassed by individuals claiming that no student actually wants this, and that myself and my colleagues, for one reason or another, fabricated this concern altogether. To respond to that, I am going to speak a little bit on two different sets of data. The first of which is from the MSU Student Landlord Satisfaction Survey, administered by ASMSU on September 22nd, 2020. With over 2,300 responses, this survey was intended to gauge MSU student opinions on their off-campus living experience. Among other statistics, the results of this survey showed that only about half of MSU students actually felt prepared to seek off-campus housing, with landlord-specific data showing that for multiple management companies, less than 25% of students felt prepared prior to signing their leases. Additionally, despite this survey being administered only about a month after the overwhelming majority of MSU students moved in August, 18% of students reported that they had already been treated unfairly by their current landlords, and 7.3% reported that they had already been discriminated against by their landlords. Similarly, at that point in the year, 16.2% of respondents were already reporting they were unsatisfied or very unsatisfied with their overall living experience. How many more students do you think will end up feeling similarly to these students after even an additional month, say 3 months, of living in their space and interacting with their landlords? The second data set comes from a very small sample survey taken by ASMSU specifically pertaining to this leasing ordinance. Polled on whether they support Ordinance 1500, the majority of MSU survey respondents, 67.3%, supported the ordinance, and only 3.6% opposed it. As I have said before, and will continue to say, students support this change. I want to remind everyone that a student's circumstances are likely to change drastically from year to year. Friends change, relationships end, interests come and go, and students transfer or even take leaves of absence to take care of their family. Our circumstances are turbulent, as you have heard many times tonight, but at least in terms of housing, this resolution would give us far more grounding than we have ever had before and help students to make informed, confident decisions in a more hospitable market. My colleagues will be speaking a little bit more about this as they have been, but on behalf of ASMSU and MSU students, I urge you all to support Ordinance 1500. Thank you, and as always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the caller? I'm going to make a request to the caller. That does seem like an interesting survey, and I would request that it be sent to council, if that is possible.
Sounds good to me.
Great.
Caller with the phone number ending in 999, you are now permitted to address council.
Caller with the phone number ending in 999. If you hit *6 on your phone, you will be able to unmute and speak to the council on any issue. One more time, caller with the phone number ending in 999. You can speak to the council on any issue if you hit *6 on your phone. If you don't wish to speak to the council, you can also say pass as well. All righty. All right. Move on to the next one.
Okay, I'm going to jump back to Natalie Kerwin. You are now permitted to address council.
Natalie Kerman, I believe you are unmuted and you can speak to the council on any issue.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. There we go.
Hi. So I'm going to wait until the presentation on the Police Oversight Commission starts. Will I be able to ask any questions after that, or is this the time to kind of ask the questions?
This would be the time to ask questions. We do not have a public comment period after this.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll ask a couple questions then. As far as just the importance of creating something like this, being the first one in the city, I guess any one of you can speak upon it, but I just wanted to ask why you guys feel it's so important as, members of the committee that are on this call to, create something like this for the city of East Lansing to help build that trust with the community.
So I'm going to request that if you have multiple questions, you ask those, and then we'll respond as a full council after all those questions are ready, just because we do have a 5-minute time limit, and I don't want to instigate kind of a back and forth situation.
Sure. Okay. So maybe do we start with just the one, or you said you wanted me to kind of lay out all of them?
If you did have multiple questions, I would request that you lay them out. That way we can respond to each accordingly. I have the one question written down here that I'm more than happy to respond to, but I do want to make sure that if you do have multiple questions, that those are kind of responded to, or those are asked within that 5-minute time frame. And then if council members do want to respond, then I will give them the opportunity to do so.
Sure. Okay, so the first one is just why you feel it's important. The second one is what went into all of the research over the last, several months. I believe it was 7 to 8 months of research that the committee was doing in order to, be prepared for this presentation. And then what will those next steps be after tonight's presentation, as far as I think you mentioned it at the beginning, Aaron, but when a decision would be made on everything and kind of where things go from here. So those would be my 3 big questions.
Okay, great. I'm more than happy to respond to those and then open it up to the rest of council if they feel they want to give a response. So the why on this, and I'm going to probably speak on this a little bit more in my council member comments. But this is vital. I mean, this is something that we, or myself personally, have been working on for the better part of 3 years. And, this isn't something that is just a community-driven thing. It's a community necessity. And the work that we've been doing as this council, I am incredibly proud of. We have done more in this city in terms of reform than a lot of cities in this state. We've diverted funds, we've changed policy, we continue to do all of those things. But when we're talking about longevity, we all know that this isn't a one-size-all-fits conversation. If there was a change that you could make to policing that would solve all these issues, many cities would have done it a long time ago. The point of having something like this in place is so that it can be a constant part of the conversation, that there is a commission, no matter who is the council and who's on that council, that can rely on and continue to make positive change. Because we don't know the issues that are going to be there 5 years from now or 10 years from now. We know the issues right now, and we're trying to address them. But having an expert group of folks is an incredibly helpful tool for policymakers, an incredibly helpful tool for staff. You see it every day in our housing commission or our planning commission or our DDA. And this issue is extremely vital, and it should be treated in the same light. And so I think this is going to be one of the most significant policy decisions we make as a council. And I'm incredibly proud to be on the council that does it, because this has, again, been a long time, and a lot of work has gone into it. And I think to address your second question, I think the members of the panel are going to be speaking on the research that went in and kind of the thought and background behind it. But there are a lot of incredibly talented and smart folks that put a lot of effort into this. And I think that respecting that and understanding that this is a really big deal is important, because this is change in East Lansing. This is progress. And I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to be supporting this. Next steps, we're going to talk about it a little bit more on the council table next week on the 15th. And then I hope to see a draft ordinance hopefully being voted on sometime very soon following after that, either at a future meeting in June or maybe even in July. So those are going to be next steps. Any other member of council want to speak to the questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, I imagine that we'll get a lot of background on the specific questions during the presentation, but I think the critical importance to me in this process is obviously the oversight of individual complaints, but I think what's really powerful about the recommendations that we've seen brought forward is that there's a recognition that policies drive some of those complaints, and that this offers an opportunity to track patterns within our department so that we can possibly anticipate future problems and then prevent them. So I think, we owe it to our community to have extremely clear policies in how we police them. And then we also owe it to our officers to be very specific about how we want them to do their jobs. And I think that this set of recommendations really offers us a roadmap in how to do that. And then, the individual complaints obviously are part of that as well. But to me, this offers a chance to really look at the system, the whole system, and figure out a way to bring it back into balance. So that's what I am particularly excited about, what we are about to be presented with tonight after reading the draft of their recommendations.
Great. Other council members?
I think that the establishment of the seated commission would be to kind of define our goals around policing in perpetuity and into the future beyond all of our times here on council. And I think that was the really important thing, to establish a set of standards and things, and involve many, you'll understand kind of when they do the presentation, the many layers of individuals that sat on that commission and the levels of experience and types of life experiences, education, law enforcement, just legal, just everything that sat on the study commission that brought together the culmination of many ideas and many different perspectives. I think that's what's been missing, just bringing those community perspectives together to put together something that can be I consider a living document. That will be something that will be modified and altered, throughout history of seated councils in the future.
Thank you. Any other council members? All righty. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'm a reporter with WILX News 10, so it's nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank you. Thanks. Emily, do you have any other callers?
Yep. Cameron Lockery, you are now permitted to address council.
Great.
Hello. Thank you all for having me here tonight. My name is Cameron Lockery. I use they, them pronouns, and I live at 2587 Abbott Road in the 25 East apartment complex, zip code 48823. I'm coming to you from outside the MSU Union because as I joined the meeting, the Wi-Fi at my apartment crashed and hasn't come back in half an hour. This issue has existed for a while, since September 2020, and still hasn't been fixed. But I'm a chemical engineering and physiology double major, and I represent the Alliance of Queer and Allied Students and Transaction, two queer and trans students groups at Michigan State University. Ordinance 1500 affects each and every one of my constituents. There are so many factors of student life that contribute to anxiety around leasing that property managers take advantage of, and being a member of the LGBTQ+ community only adds to those anxieties. Queer and trans students are often coming from unwelcoming and unloving homes, making us desperate to find anywhere to live that isn't back home. Many queer and trans students don't have financial support from their families and are more likely to commit to a cheap leasing deal too early to feel sure about their living situation, or sign a predatory lease that seems advantageous on the surface. While housing discrimination based on sexual identity, and gender expression is prohibited in Lansing and East Lansing, it is not prohibited federally. Out-of-state students coming from areas where housing discrimination based on LGBTQ+ status is legal often don't know they're protected, and that fear of being denied a leasing contract or even removed from housing is so easily taken advantage of. Pushing back the leasing season to January means queer and trans students will have enough time to find a place that truly suits them, to sign a lease that fits their budget without exploiting them, to learn their rights, to ensure their choice of roommates or neighbors won't make them feel unsafe, and to feel secure in their choice of home. On a more personal note, it is extremely difficult to put into words the feeling of fear that comes with moving into a new place, a new complex, a new dorm room, and not knowing whether or not you will be safe there, not knowing whether or not those roommates that you don't know will treat you fairly, whether or not they'll commit violence against you. It's terrifying in a truly deep way. And I had that situation moving from Virginia to East Lansing when I first joined in the dorm rooms. I was lucky enough to continue with my roommates and to not join an apartment with individuals I don't know, but I have seen it happen to almost every other person I have met in East Lansing. They have entered into a roommate situation very early with someone that they aren't necessarily sure that they want to live with. And to have a leasing system that allows for that sense of deep primal fear for one's own safety, security, and life feels inherently unethical. Please call upon the council to consider this ordinance. Thank you so much, and I yield my time.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for the caller? Seeing none, thank you for being with us. Appreciate you sharing your experience.
Those are all the callers on the line.
Okay, all righty. We are going to move on to council member communications. And folks had a good amount of time to prepare, so I shouldn't feel bad about calling them yet. I'm going to start with Councilmember Watson.
I knew you were going to pick me because I knew I get skipped regularly, which is fantastic as an introvert. But anyway, yes, I've had time. Just want to say I am excited about the summertime. I'm excited to be able to walk around mask-free more and to be able to get out with folks. And so it's nice to see faces, it's whole faces and whole bodies, and just want to encourage everyone to continue to wash our hands and keep ourselves safe, especially for our kiddos or for those people that haven't gotten themselves vaccinated yet. It's easier and easier to get vaccinated. And I did even recently hear the Walgreens that opened up recently that we discussed on City Council is offering the Pfizer vaccination, which is good for your kids, 12 and on up. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you everyone who writes in and calls in and contacts us. We hear you, we take a lot into consideration, and we appreciate all the thoughts and all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go to Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. Well, first off, I would like to congratulate a real ninja in our midst. A 9-year-old, Tristan Martin, who lives near me, is going to be competing in the World Ninja Championships. And who doesn't need more ninjas? So best of luck, Tristan. I didn't know such a thing existed, but I do hope to meet you sometime soon. The second thing is sort of a question and more of an announcement. I'd like to ask Mr. Homier just to double check, but I have signed up to volunteer for the expungement clinic hosted by 54B District Court. Since joining the council, I haven't taken any work in 54B because 54B is a product of the state and also a product of the city. I would be a volunteer. I would gain no personal benefit from this. And if I don't do it, they will be down 25% of their attorneys, as I understand it. Mr. Homier?
Well, I'll have to look at it a little closely. Maybe you and I can discuss what all is involved with it. I'm happy to look at it and give you an opinion on that. But I don't see any issues with it, but I'd like to know more about it.
Okay, happy to do that. And to any attorneys listening, there is a need. It's Juneteenth. It's a good opportunity to use your law degree for something you always intended to do when you were in law school. It's a great way to celebrate Juneteenth and support legal services of South Central Michigan. I believe they've blanketed through the Ingham Bar, and you can certainly reach them through LSSCM. But if those don't work, email me, lbabcock@cityofeastlansing.org, and I will forward that. Lastly, I, like many, many others, have been looking forward to tonight's presentation. I see this as the beginning. I know it's, well, perhaps the end of the beginning, but not yet the beginning of the end. A lot has gone into this point. We've had a stellar group of people working on this. I know there have been some disagreements, but that's what generates good policy. So I hope that a lot comes out of this, both tonight's report and how we go forward from here. I think we all know that we have a lot to do. So thank you. I will wrap it up there.
Thank you, Councilmember Babcock. Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, starting with to build on Councilperson Babcock's position on the expungement clinic, June 19th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Virtual Zoom clinic. And as you stated before, there is a need for additional attorneys to sign up for the clinic. Capital Area Michigan Works, 517-492-5518 to put your name in the queue, up to 100 participants for this round of participation to be a part of that. And this is just really important work, and I'm thankful to 54B and for Legal Services for providing this opportunity. I want to put out a big thank you to Adam Cummins and his team for all the things in downtown, and just how quickly that all came together was miraculous and beautiful. Getting the downtown area up and running very quickly and closed off, and just the swiftness of how quickly it came around. I wasn't around last weekend very much with open houses and other things, but I look forward to experiencing downtown this weekend. Also, Farmers Market beginning June 6th through October 31st. One of my favorite activities, unfortunately, this is where the rubber meets the road for me, where I spend a lot of money and buy a bunch of stuff. I love the Farmers Market, and just ask you to participate. Valley Court Park. I want to acknowledge upcoming to build off the June 19th Juneteenth celebration in the Pinecrest neighborhood. 4 p.m. start time, doing kind of acknowledgements and other celebrations around the events of June 19th and the Emancipation celebration, and just bring acknowledgement to that. I know Aaron's going to acknowledge both Tim McCaffrey and Randy Teleferro's retirement, so I'll save it. I'll table that for him. I know he's got something there. I want to give a big thank you as liaison to the Police Oversight Study Commission. Once again, I can't acknowledge just the Herculean lift that this was, and I don't want any of that to go unrecognized for the group that did that. You would think it was a 100-person group based upon the amount of work that they did in a very short period of time under very strict time constraints and immense pressure. And I want to thank them for that work. And last but not least, I want to give an acknowledgement to the passing of Samuel J. Hosey. I went to 91 years old, grandfather to Alex Hosey, the author of Why I Sit, and father to Sam Hosey, local member of the East Lansing community as well. He was the first licensed African-American pharmacist in Ingham County. Graduated in 1960 from Texas Southern University. Was the Fink Award winner for the highest GPA in his class, and president of American Pharma Association, a pioneer and a trailblazer. I've worked in the pharmaceutical biotech industry for 25 years, so he's a trailblazer even for my career. My career wouldn't exist without someone like Samuel J. Hosey, and faced many of the exact same challenges that we're addressing today around the areas of social justice, around housing, around job participation, around pay and income, and a whole bunch of equity things that he faced even as the top person in his class. It shows us there's still work to be done even today. So I want to honor the work we do today, be it police oversight and many of the other things that we're doing and honoring for equity and equality, and dedicate them to Samuel J. Hosey. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Ron talked about a couple of mine, but I'm going to talk about them again anyway. I was able to go down to our opening day at the farmers market last Sunday, which was delightful. Particularly great for me because the vegetables haven't started growing yet. So it was all mostly banana bread and other sweet treats, which, you know, I feel healthy and wholesome because I bought them at the farmers market. So that was delightful. Looking forward to that season starting up again. It was really enjoyable to just see people chatting with their neighbors, and it felt really great to see everybody out on what turned out to be a gorgeous day as well. I also have spent some time wandering our downtown and exploring all of the different little seating areas that have been created by our downtown placemaking team. I promised Adam and his group of placemakers that I would come and paint barricades on Albert Avenue, and then I got there and it was 90 degrees. So I took pictures of people painting barricades, and I decided not to do that because it actually looked miserable. But I really appreciate the group, all of the effort, not just the effort of putting it together, but the actual physical effort of building those tables and chairs and painting those barricades. We've got a really dedicated group of people that has been working very hard in some quite unpleasantly hot conditions. And it is really coming together beautifully. Every time I pass through, I see people sitting in every little nook and cranny that we've got set up down there. I particularly love the alley near Campbell's Market and the way that that's coming together. I've been trying to do some of my meetings there at the picnic tables there in the alley. So it's been awesome. And actually, a lot of the meetings that I've been taking lately, I've been really filling up my schedule with people who are doing interesting things regarding creating opportunities for small and micro businesses in our region. I've been talking to different people from different projects in our surrounding communities, as well as in East Lansing. And I think, a lot of people know that my own business started as a micro business popping up inside other businesses. And I really feel that this moment of COVID recovery and economic crisis in a lot of ways is a great opportunity for us to create those opportunities for people who have an idea, but don't have the capital to cover overhead on a large space yet. So anybody who is interested in talking to me about any idea that you have for small and micro businesses in our area, I would love to have coffee with you. My phone number is listed on the council page. You know my email, jgreg@cityofelastlansing.com. You can also stop by my store and harass me in person. As long as it's something fun, I do not mind being pulled away from my work for those conversations. So my personal creative side project right now is small business entrepreneurship. So, and I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Alrighty. I got a couple of things to acknowledge today, although I said some things in response to some earlier questions. So we have a couple of retirements that are coming down the pipeline this week, which is both sad and happy at the same time, because of course, very, very happy that Tim McCaffrey gets to go golf in very great places, but very, very sad to see folks leaving. I want to talk a little bit about Chief Randy Talaferro. And I'm gonna speak on some career highlights, but I'm also gonna just speak a little bit personally for a second. Hopefully folks will let me do so. So he's had a career in East Lansing for 20 years, including years managing both the Lansing Fire and EMS and East Lansing. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible lift that was not only made as a decision to try to regionalize and issue a lot more cooperation, but also as a cost-saving measure. But that didn't mean that the job got any easier. And so him stepping into that role was something that was incredibly difficult, but was handled with extreme grace, and should be acknowledged that he served both those communities extremely well. And it should be acknowledged that any difference to that is he did a great job. And I want to talk about East Lansing a little bit. He has been an incredible voice in our city, not only throughout his career, but also this past year in managing a pandemic. As many folks know, he was on our team and actually leading some of our emergency preparedness plans. He had to respond to incredibly difficult situations with changing data, changing circumstances, and had to be on the advice for our city manager and the council very, very frequently to make decisions that would affect a lot of people, and were there to save lives. And that is what those folks do every single day. They save lives. And Chief Talaferro, without a leader like you, I do not believe that we would have the impact that we do. And I'd like to acknowledge personally, Chief Talaferro has always been somebody that I was more than able to talk to discuss complicated issues with, that had the history and also perspective of this city, to make sure that we were pushing things forward and we were going with progress. And the amount of care and passion that he has had for his work has been evident in his service to the city, but I think it has been evident to the folks in the community as well through his many different volunteer positions, as well as just how much he has done for this city. And so I want to acknowledge the incredible work of Chief Talaferro. You will be missed, but we appreciate your service here. Thank you for many, many years, and you are leaving a legacy and some really tough shoes to fill. So I thank you for that. And on a personal level, I cannot acknowledge enough how helpful you have been throughout my council career, and I'm sure that is the case for many other councils in the past. So thank you. Our next retirement is Director Tim McCaffrey of our East Lansing Parks and Recreation Department, topping out at about 22 years with the city here. Now, many of you may not know, many of you will, what our Parks Department was when he first joined, and what it is now at. Building of our Parks Department, expanding on the opportunities that we have had for play in this area, for childcare, for our community center, for programming, has been so substantial that it is a main focus of many people's emails, calls, and everything else to this council. I just want to acknowledge that there are many, many reasons why people move to the city of East Lansing, but one of the biggest ones is the amount of opportunities that we have in this area. And the work continues. I mean, we continue to hear about advancements in policy and fees and all these different things because the expansion of these programs was a priority for somebody who had a vision for East Lansing and then implemented that vision. And without people like Director McCaffrey and without people like Chief Talaferro, we would not be in the place that we are in the city of East Lansing. And I need to acknowledge that as much as I can, because we thank staff for work on individual policies when we're obviously here, but that vision for the future is something that is needed and has influenced our city more than I hope that they know. Our city has benefited for many, many years from the leadership of Director Tim McCaffrey. I wish him nothing but the best in the future, and I appreciate his service to this community. And I would be remiss if I honestly didn't say Director House as well. You're going to be leaving us for a year. I appreciate your service to this country. Thank you for being with us in the city. And thank you for having such a great team that I am not worried about you leaving for a year. So I appreciate that. Acknowledge a couple of things that are going on in our city right now. As you see, there's a lot of activity in our downtown. Expect more in the next few months. The reason for this is a number of things, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the vision for last year and then the vision for this year going forward. Last year, myself and the Mayor Pro Tem had a lot of conversations about what we wanted to see our East Lansing downtown like. I had conversations with the former mayor at that point, the city manager, and then COVID hit. And we had to make some really tough decisions. Businesses closed doors, and we had to acknowledge the fact that we weren't probably going to be able to implement a lot of the things that we wanted to see in the past year. Really, we've seen a lot of growth in our downtown development. And at this point, we have businesses that hopefully will thrive for many, many years, ones that have been here for decades and ones that are just opening up now. But the point of doing this and the necessity of this council is to make sure that we are encouraging that growth and we are doing it in a sustainable way. And so to see the acknowledgement of these programs and to push the needle on what we view East Lansing downtown as is something that is vital for us. My vision of East Lansing and our downtown is a vibrant area of place, of play, and of a lot of retail and food establishments and people working and living in the downtown and loving it. And the way that we do that is by taking every effort we have to make sure that we're doing things that other cities have done that have worked, and even listening to our businesses on things that nobody's even thought of before. And I'm proud to say that we're pushing that needle forward, and you're going to see a lot more things going forward in the city of East Lansing. East Lansing downtown is open for business, and you're going to see a lot different feel in the next few years. And so I'm really proud of the work that's happened so far. I just want to acknowledge that. As we go forward, I've been asked this a couple of times, but I want to make my statement clear. I am in favor of MSU requiring vaccinations for students that are going to have to be communicative with classes on campus or are going to be actually living on campus. I have expressed that opinion to members of the MSU community frequently. And of course, MSU got a recommendation from one of their commissions to do the same. I think that would be vital for our community. A lot of other cities have, or a lot of other universities have done that across the nation. I think that it is vital that we do that to make sure that we still contain this virus as we move into the fall semester and are still allowed to stay safe and open. I want to make that clear while I'm here, just because it is an important issue and I want to acknowledge it. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. I am going to move on to the city manager's report. Director House.
Good evening, Mayor. I do not have a report for tonight.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to the city attorney's report. Mr. Hummer.
Good evening, Mayor. I just wanted to mention, I don't have anything to report, but I just wanted to note it that because my 11-year-old son plays lacrosse, we had the opportunity to come down to downtown East Lansing on Friday night. We stayed at the Marriott, and my son and I ate at the Jolly Pumpkin, and we had a fabulous time. I met Mr. Cummings down there. We had an opportunity to hang out for a bit, and the downtown looked phenomenal, and both my son and I had a fabulous time.
Well, I appreciate that comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is that the end of your report?
That is it.
Great. All right. It is 8:40 right now. Before we get into our special presentation, I'm going to take a 10-minute break very briefly, and then we will get back to our study committee presentation. I'll see you guys back at 8:50. Thank you. All righty, do we have folks back? All right, we have a number of presenters on the agenda today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand the item over to Chair Chuck Grigsby, who's going to introduce some of the folks that are going to be presenting as well as run through their presentation. And I'm going to request that folks that are going to be presenting today start off by stating pronouns and a preferred title to be referred to, both by the council and probably members of the community or members of the media that might be watching at this point. And as well for the council, in speaking with the chair of the commission beforehand, what I request is, unless there is something that is immediately needed for clarification, we save questions until the end of the presentation. At this point, again, we're going to be giving about a week for this to settle, and there's still going to be opportunities for questions at the discussion only meeting. But if there are questions that arise from this presentation at this point, I'd ask that those are asked at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. And Chair Chuck Grigsby, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. It's good to be with you tonight. As you know, we are here to do our presentation from the study on independent police oversight. And we're very proud to get to this point. It's been years in the making, but before I start talking, I really want to just acknowledge the members, including the ones who will be presenting tonight, for their work. So I'll just list their names for you here real quickly. Eric Williams, Christine Root, Cedric Harrow, Kelly Ellsworth Eshinson, Noel Garcia Jr., Sade Codwell, Kathleen Boyle, Helen Josephson, Quentin Tyler. We're part of this 11-member commission that we've been working on what now is almost 8 months of work to get to where we are. So thank you. I'm going to be laying it up here for you, and then we'll go into the actual presenters when it comes to the information that we have tonight for you. But I just really wanted to give a perspective. We heard from some callers tonight about kind of really the history of that. I think, Mayor, you talked about this has been years in the making, and we're finally here. And I just wanted to add a little bit portion of the HRC, which is the Human Rights Commission perspective, and kind of where we started off with this once it did come from the community and we started working on this as a whole. And we really started off working with the police department, and we were getting very little information or information in a way that we could analyze to really understand the scope of what was going on in the city of East Lansing when it comes to community policing and our public safety department. And as years went by, we got a little bit better at what we were doing. We started asking better questions, and we were getting a little bit more information, which was great, and great with also changing and hopefully getting the culture of the police department with sharing that information. And then we got to another point of a plateau where we got to where we were getting this information, but we didn't really have the tools to really address some of the policies and procedures going forward. And we kind of really stopped there. And, you know, with the resolution passed by council last year to create this oversight commission that we've been doing our work, was really where it comes from when it comes to the HRC perspective. So I just really wanted to mention that real quickly. And then also, before I hand it off to my colleague, I want to talk about within our meeting process over the last 7-8 months. We were meeting, as some of you know, twice a month, every other week, for hours and hours at a time. And those people that I mentioned earlier gave their expertise, time, experience to this commission, all free time, which is the most valuable thing that you can offer when it comes to doing some work here in the city. So I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that. But the other thing that we had going on within these meetings was that we had a portion and a section of our meetings within those monthly meetings we were having community input meeting. To no disrespect to all the 11 commission members that we worked with, for me, that was the most powerful, impactful meeting that we had throughout this whole process, because we were able to finally then get a real feel for what the people and what they perceived in what an oversight was. And so as we had this meeting, we had over 50 some people participate. We got confirmation, we got directive, we got scope, and we got the idea and the point of independence and how the community really perceives that and how important it is as we go in and as the other commissioners talk about some of the items within this presentation tonight, how that is a crucial element of the recommendations and the draft ordinance that we presented here to council. So with that being said, thank you. And then I believe who's going to be speaking next is going to be Vice Chair of the commission that we did our thing, Christine Root. Are you available?
I sure am. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm Chris Root. I use she, her pronouns. I don't use any title. My task in our presentation is to speak briefly about the information the study committee compiled about police interactions with people in the community, which is presented in Chapter 2 of the report, and the history of public review of complaints, which is covered in Chapter 3. Since the council will be voting only on the recommendations for establishing an oversight commission, you may well wonder why we spent so much time on this research part of the report also, which is the part A of the report. So I want to share 3 reasons why we did this research. The first is that when the study committee began, there was very little public information available about police interactions with the public in East Lansing. For example, we had no information about who was being arrested or accurate information about the use of force. And it seemed to us if we're going to try to come up with ideas for oversight, we needed to understand more what was actually happening among the people involved between the police and the public. Samuel Walker, who is a guru in the field of police accountability in the US, said in a report for the city of Albuquerque, providing detailed information about the police department and the complaint process is extremely valuable. We are not aware of any disadvantages with or criticisms of providing public information. He went on to say, the only caution is that public reports need to be sensitive to the privacy rights of both complainants and police officers, where this information is potentially damaging and hasn't been otherwise publicly disclosed. So making quality information about policing public seemed to us a crucial first step for so many elements of police accountability. And Chapter 2 is a small step in that direction. The study committee received 3 presentations from the ELPD chief and deputy chief who met with us for all of our meetings. Those presentations were about arrests, use of force, and the complaint process. They occurred in October, November, and December. Then the study committee voted on a set of follow-up questions that we needed for our report. And we got some answers to those questions in January and February. We also found data about arrests that contains age, gender, and race information that is entered by each Michigan Police Department into the Michigan Incident Crime Reporting Database. Deputy Chief Gonzalez led us to this valuable public online source, and we used it extensively in Chapter 2. And there's a footnote to indicate how people can go and look at that data themselves. There's also data there about MSU Police Department if you're interested. The biggest takeaway from our research has already been pretty widely reported, which is that Black people have been consistently overrepresented in interactions with ELPD. This includes 24% of officer-initiated stops, 36% of arrests, and approximately 50% of use of force. These are for different time periods. In each case, it was the most extensive current time period we could get information about. Also, Black people represent 40% of the offenses reported by 54B District Court. Black people are only 7% of the residents of East Lansing and less than 12% of residents in Ingham County. So this was clearly an issue of concern. Table 16 in Chapter 3 gives additional evidence of the need to work on reducing these disparities. This chapter is the one about complaints. We found that a large proportion of the complaints against officers were made by Black people and other people of color, and that many of these complaints were about racial discrimination and racial bias. Also, there were 2 complaints about the very serious issue of excessive use of force, and these are complaints that the council is already very well aware of. The second reason we did this research was to pass on to the eventual Oversight Commission both useful recent information and useful data sources. That's why these chapters contain about 45 footnotes and many appendices. For example, Appendix 11 contains the compiled weekly reports from ELPD to the City Council of 77 use of force incidents during the last 11 months. City Council members, you already obviously have that information, but other people didn't. And we thought also that putting it all together would be helpful for analysis. So that's now been done, but there hasn't been an analysis of that yet. A third reason for this research is that we hoped to identify some baseline data and sources of information that the City Council could use to monitor and evaluate recent policy changes about policing. We were interested in two policies in particular. One was your recent revisions of the Disorderly Conduct Code, and another was the police department's policy change in July of last year that officers may run license plate information only if they have an articulable reason to do so. As explained in the report, finding this information proved to be much more difficult than we anticipated. We had hoped to give you that baseline information in Chapter 2, and it is not there. But we think that's still something very important to research and find out. We also were looking for metrics to use to evaluate racial equity in the practices of the police department, a goal that the City Council set for all of city government in your resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis that you adopted in November of last year. So Chapter 2 is intended partly as a starting point for identifying metrics that might be useful for that particular department that the council can use going forward. Moving on to complaints in Chapter 3, Chuck Grigsby said a little bit about the history of the police department reporting to the HRC, and that over time, this started in January of 2017, over time, there has been year after year an increase in the amount of information that the HRC has requested and the way it is provided in writing and available to the public. And the police department was quite responsive to that. And you can see, for example, Appendix K is the most recent annual report. For the first time, that report includes the number of complaints and administrative inquiries about the officers against whom there were complaints in the last year that happened during the previous 5 years. That's an example of progress we've already made that we can build on. The HRC also asked many and better informed questions each year, many of them raising important policy issues. This also is a step in the direction of recognizing that the Oversight Commission needed to have a mandate that included being able to make policy recommendations and not just looking at individual complaints. Chapter 3 ends with a discussion of the draft ordinance 1463 that was prepared in May 2019. This is in Appendix L. It came to council and council asked for input from the HRC. This was the first attempt to create a new body that would take over a review function of the HRC. There were strong public criticisms expressed of this draft regarding issues such as its composition, lack of access to any written or video information at all, very limited scope, dealing only with individual complaints, lack of inclusion of people most affected by policing in its drafting, and the absence of any research about how other municipalities were putting into place police oversight. Fortunately, the HRC and the City Council were open to hearing these reactions, and this really led to the council forming the study committee. This committee has now made recommendations for an independent community police oversight commission for your consideration that you have before you now. And we believe that these are recommendations that have considerably more support in the community than earlier versions. So we think progress is being made, and we look forward to your role in making this really, really important decision on behalf of the community. I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. So I think we're on to Cedric Hero now.
Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Cedric Hero, he, him. I will be speaking about Chapter 4, which is the discussion of the national landscape of civilian oversight. where we looked at several examples from a number of different cities, both at the national level as well as what City Manager Lahanis referred to as our PA 312 comparables, as well as a number of non-comparables that provided us with what we felt were relevant, useful examples. This sounds odd to say, but in almost 25 years of researching police behavior, I have found one thing to be fairly consistent across the variety of police departments that I've worked with, individual officers that I've spoken to, command staff, city personnel, and having ridden in a patrol car for over 300 hours with officers, observing what they do. And that is that the occupation of police officer is one that is incredibly difficult. It is one in which officers are very often confronting people who do not want those officers to be there, and are having a very difficult moment in their lives. That needs to be balanced with the understanding that law enforcement officers in this country occupy a unique space, in that they are the sole people that have the authority to use coercive force against American citizens on American soil. They can make you do something that you do not want to do. And that coercive force can ultimately result in deadly force. To those whom much is given, much will be required. And in that sense, given the ultimate power that police officers have, and given the fact that they work for us, the public, and the community, what we require in return is what is generally referred to as legitimacy in policing. This issue of trust, the issue of we, the public, allow the police to have this authority, that we've made this bargain, that you have these ultimate tools to use. And in doing so, you maintain our constitutional rights and you keep us safe. We understand that the job is very unpleasant at times. That doesn't mean that just because something might not violate policy or might not violate the law, that it is the right thing to do. And ultimately, trust between the community and the police concerns themselves with that aspect of legitimacy. And the NACOL, the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, has identified a number of criteria, a number of important characteristics for oversight bodies that have been proven to be extremely helpful in repairing that trust between the community and police officers. And so, again, these are things that we identify through research and looking at some of these NACOL publications and the training and webinars that they provide. These are themes that came up again in the community input meeting. These are things that we as a study committee talked about from the very beginning. The first and probably most important is the issue of transparency. There is a tendency within the police culture to be very insular, to be very cynical about people whom the police encounter. And that very often leads itself to the mentality of, if you don't do the job, don't tell me how to do the job, because you don't understand what the job is like. And that's poisonous. That is a condescending attitude that does not lend itself to the community trusting that the police will do the right thing. I will say that throughout this process, I have been very heartened by what Chief Johnson and Deputy Chief Gonzalez have done. They've been very forthcoming. They've given us everything that we've asked for to the extent that they've been able to. They're very clearly interested in taking things in the right direction, but this is a long-term process. And unfortunately, policing as an occupation on the street is not necessarily something that lends itself to long-term thinking. Right? I show up to a situation that I've been called to, I handle this immediate incident, and then I go on and handle what I need to handle next. And a lot of these factors that Nicole has talked about are things that ultimately make policing safer, easier, and more effective for everybody. Not just for the community, but for police officers themselves, right? And I think it's helpful that ELPD has bought into the idea that these reforms can make our job as police officers easier, right? Because ultimately, who wouldn't want their job to be a little easier? Transparency is the first part of that, right? When something happens and the response is, well, that didn't violate policy, that's not good enough, right? The community wants to understand, why did something happen this way? Even if it didn't violate policy, was it necessary? Could something else have been done? Sometimes the answer is no. Some situations are truly unavoidable. Right? Very often the answer is, maybe we can rethink how we approach this situation. Maybe that involves training, maybe that involves changes in policies and things like that. But people want to have that conversation with the police. And NACOL identifies that as the foundational principle of oversight, transparency. As Chris talked about, a large portion of that transparency is this issue of access to data. I will say that ELPD is not unique in that there's a lot of data that they didn't already collect that we felt they should have been collecting. That's fairly common. The average department is fairly small. The average department might seem like they have a fairly sizable budget, but there are a number of, sort of bureaucratic restrictions on some of these things. If you ever had to take a look at how some of these different databases don't talk to each other, you'll get a pretty good look of why it's impossible to get this report with all of this data from this other report. And it's maddening to people. So some of those things need to be repaired as much as possible. But some of that is also an issue of responsiveness. Right? In one of the example cities that we looked at, in the city of Austin, Texas, their auditor report found that the city ultimately responded to 15% of their recommendations. Right? That meant that there was no requirement in the ordinance for the police department to even acknowledge that they had received a recommendation from the Oversight Commission. And again, from the outside, you look in and you think that that's a minimal first step. The bare minimum is an Oversight Commission makes a recommendation and the police department says, thank you, we acknowledge that you've made this recommendation. We'll look into it. Right? I mean, that's bare minimum. So data access is fairly important, obviously. The budgeting process, again, some of this stuff, as I believe Chuck mentioned, maybe gets us into the weeds of fiscal responsibility and budgeting and union issues and contracts and things like that, right? But one thing that we know is the greater the amount of power and the greater the budget that oversight commissions have, the more effective they are. In Denver, Colorado, most recently, where their oversight commission has a fairly broad level of authority, but even more importantly, a significant budget, after making a number of policy recommendations, they found that use of force went down 21% in the total number of arrests that were made. And more importantly, there was less violence against police officers, right? So that's another one of those points where you could say, if we can all come together and do something that increases the community's trust in the police and decreases the odds that you as an officer are going to encounter somebody on the job in this tense encounter where injury will occur, not just to them, but potentially to you as an officer, that's a win-win situation for everybody, right? The other is this concept of being proactive, right? This is not just responding to individual incidents, right? Sam Walker, as Chris mentioned, and others note that the most effective oversight bodies are those that make policy recommendations, right? Again, with the caveat that police departments say, hey, thanks, we've gotten your recommendation and let's have a conversation about how we do that. It's another one of those things that East Lansing Police Department started doing even before the study committee started meeting, as they were looking at accreditation, as they were looking at the implementation of an early warning system and you know, a database that incorporates a lot more data pieces. And so the Oversight Commission should have this vital function of sort of acting as a role on an ongoing basis, on a rolling basis, a monitoring situation of where can we get better, right? I think a lot of people immediately assume that saying where can we get better is a criticism and saying we're doing something terribly. Sometimes it's we're doing things okay, how do we do it even better, right? Not every struggle to be better is an inherent criticism of what is currently the case, right? And then the last important aspect is that public outreach. That was why, as Chuck mentioned, it was so important for us to have that community input meeting, right? And we were pretty excited to hear community members saying the same things that we had been finding in our research and that we had been talking about as a study committee. All of those things that they were saying, particularly about transparency and, you know, potential abuses of authority and things like that, those are all issues of trust, right? Again, from the city standpoint, this is a long-term process. One of the other things that we found is that it was not at all uncommon to, after a certain period of time, have an evaluation of the Oversight Commission come back and say, we've done a few things well, we need to change a few things about how the Oversight Commission is operating, right? And so one of our recommendations is that we have an evaluation after a 4-year period. It's been fairly common, you know, and Austin and Denver are 2 examples. The city of Albany is one of the most recent examples, where after a 2 or 3 year period, the Oversight Commission came back to the city and said, you know what, we actually need a little more power, right? We tried to front load that in the sense of giving the Oversight Commission the ability to request independent investigations. But there are other issues like subpoena power that are frankly a lot more difficult to deal with. Police unions are fairly resistant to those things, right? The study committee received a letter from the police union before we had even begun our work, questioning some of the things that they thought we might be planning on doing. You know, so despite being somewhat limited in that scope, we've tried to give the Oversight Commission as much power and authority as possible in order to be as effective as possible. This is really, you know, a long-term process, and I know I've said that before, but this is something that we've seen in policing over the last 55 years, which is a little longer than I've been doing this. But you know, we started with the community policing movement, even in the 70s. And then, you know, we saw a period of significantly increased crime and violence in the 80s and the 90s. And so we changed to some tactics which are now not quite as popular, things like stop, question, and frisk, things that now that crime has decreased again considerably are viewed as much more intrusive. The average person isn't worried about being shot and killed by the police. That is certainly a valid concern. The average person's biggest complaint about the police is, I'm just getting harassed. I don't know why they're stopping me all the time. I've lived here 3 years. I've been stopped 17 times. I mean, not me personally, but right? You know, I don't understand why they stopped me because they pulled me over and they never explained. And I asked them why, and the response was, well, I don't have to technically explain to you why I pulled you over. And sure, that may legally be true, but that's not going to repair the trust between the police department and the community, right? I think in that context, one of the most important things that the Oversight Commission can do is to be vigilant about continuing to get that community input as time goes on, because the Oversight Commission itself is not, the city of East Lansing doesn't have a large enough pattern of complaints for the Oversight Commission to be able to tell realistically within a short time frame if things are changing or not. but getting that consistent community input is a much better barometer of what that relationship looks like. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Eric Williams, who did yeoman's work on the ordinance itself.
Unmuted. Well, I would much prefer responding to questions, but let me give a kind of an overview of the high points of the ordinance and the nuts and bolts here. I wanted to say a couple of words at the outset about the constraints that we were working under. And, you know, there's some things that we can do and some things we can't do. And so we tried to operate within those constraints. And I would say that they fall in three categories. There's employment rights and the structure of the city governance, and then the size and the budget of the city. And those all put constraints on what we can do. The process of disciplinary action against police officers is pretty much controlled by the collective bargaining agreement, and ultimately is a decision that's made by an arbitrator. The city manager and the police chief have management authority over over police officers in the police department. And unless we get a change to the city charter, this commission can't order police officers to do anything or manage the police department. It just doesn't have that power. We can't hire police officers. We can't fire police officers. We can't hire the police chief. And then those cities that have oversight commissions tend to be larger than East Lansing and have larger budgets. The million-person cities can hire a full-time monitor or auditor, somebody that'll pull down $150,000 a year, and have an office and a staff. And East Lansing just doesn't have the capacity or the volume of business to justify that. So we're trying to work within those constraints. At the outset, we looked at the city of Albany. Albany is a city about twice as big as East Lansing, and has what they did was, when the Oversight Commission needed to conduct an investigation, they made arrangements for the commission to hire an outside investigator on a case-by-case basis, and we tried to adapt that model to our situation. And to get to work in the context of the collective bargaining agreement, we tried to find things that the commission could do that wouldn't step on the employment rights of individual police officers. Things that were outside of the disciplinary action path that was laid out by the collective bargaining agreement. And so let me, after giving you an idea of what we can't do, let me give you an idea of what we worked out that we could do. The central mechanism that we tried to set up is a mechanism for getting information out of the police department and getting it to the public. And there are two handoffs of information that happen. One between the police department and the commission, and the other handoff between the commission and the public. The section 24 is the central area where we're talking about the exchange of information. And the first thing that we set up in this ordinance is that the Freedom of Information Act doesn't apply when the commission asks for information from the police department. Commission is a city department, police department is another city department, and one department should not require another department to file a Freedom of Information Act request in order to get information. So in section 24, we're saying that the Freedom of Information Act doesn't apply. And in particular, we're saying that the exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act don't apply. I'm on the verge of getting into some weeds here. You remember earlier in your meeting where you had Mrs. Drager from East Lansing Info had a concern about the information that she wasn't getting from an executive session. And the mayor promised that he was going to get together with the city attorney and pare down the information that was being embargoed from the requester. And so we're saying that that can be done as a routine measure. When you look closely at a claim of confidential information, you can very often, through conversation, reach a settlement or a resolution where the important confidential information, the information that shouldn't be divulged to the public, that's protected, and most of the information that's being requested will be released. In the litigation world, they call that a Vaughan index. So we have set up a mechanism that puts constraints on information that is claimed to be confidential and tends to maximize the information that is exchanged between the police department and the commission. That's the handoff between the department and the commission. The handoff between the commission and the public, everything that the commission has is releasable to the public, except for very limited bits of information that both sides, both the department and the commission may agree that there's a compelling reason not to release it to the public. So we're trying to maximize the amount of information that is extracted from the police department and minimize the amount of confidential information that's held back, and do the same thing when the public asks for information from the commission. If there's a dispute, we have set up a mechanism for the commission to appeal that to the city council. It's section 2522A. We're saying that if there's a dispute between the police department and the commission regarding information that the police department doesn't want to give up, the commission can go to the city council, and the city council will, by resolution, pass on that and make a decision. We contemplated that we would have a series of city council resolutions on the books that people can look at and use as a kind of precedent, a source of precedent for future disputes. So that's the information exchange mechanism. Commission doesn't have very much power, actual power to manage the police department. What the commission does is make recommendations. And their section 5 sets out a large number of areas where the where the commission can make recommendations. There's a general grant. There's a general provision in section 5. The city can collect the commission can collect information about anything having to do with the local criminal justice system, and make recommendations about anything having to do with the local criminal justice system, the police, anything that relates to the police. And then it goes on to specify some particular instances where the commission can make recommendations. Disorderly conduct charges. You'll remember last year in the Gacito case, the city had originally charged Mr. Gacito with one of the disorderly conduct charges, maybe obstruction or resisting or disorderly conduct. And in the process of discovering that Gacito had what looked like a legitimate claim of police misconduct, the city dropped those charges against Mr. Gacito. And our ordinance seeks to make that a more routine practice, a practice that can be used routinely in the future whenever there's that kind of situation where people on the street call this contempt of cop. You in order to perhaps cover up a questionable arrest, you charge the person with something. We have a separate ordinance that tries to encourage the city attorney. Can't tell the city attorney what to do, but we can encourage the city attorney that when a situation warrants, and there may be a problem of a potential misconduct issue, consider dropping charges against the defendant. The Ingham County prosecutor a few months ago came up with a policy to that effect. And we're trying to bring the Ingham County policy to East Lansing. Another area of recommendation has to do with the 911 emergency system. The commission is authorized to look into the 911 emergency system and see if there is a way to add first responders who are not police officers. There are a number of cities who are looking into this, and perhaps the most famous instance of this is the Cahoot system in Eugene, Oregon, where they have a social work agency that responds to 911 calls where someone is having a mental health crisis, or they're homeless people that are making some kind of prompting people to call the police, call 911. So the commission is empowered to collect information about the 911 system and make recommendations about to see if they can help facilitate that kind of arrangement in East Lansing, perhaps involving community mental health as opposed to police officers. Make recommendations about training, accreditation of the police department, the police department's early intervention system. You're familiar perhaps with early intervention systems. The police department is looking into developing one. And those are management systems that use various data to predict when an officer is likely to have a performance problem in the future. The commission can't operate that because it's a management system, but the commission can collect information about it and encourage the police department, make recommendations for its budgeting, for its to make sure the police department is taking advantage of the systems that are out there. Use of force incidents. The commission can investigate and make recommendations about the department's use of force policy. There's a provision for research. The commission can hire a professional researcher to design and pursue research. Anything having to do with the police department or the local criminal justice system in East Lansing. And there's a provision for that in the in our budget projection. The Section 9 gives the commission a bully pulpit and what we're calling a free speech. The members of the commission can speak freely without constraint on any matter within their scope. The commission will maintain its own website in Section 6 and issue annual reports to the council and to the public, looking into the uses of force that the department has reported to it, encounters with homeless individuals, people in mental health crises, encounters with juveniles, summaries of dispositions of complaints, the results of its research. And those would be in the annual reports that we contemplate that the commission would publish. Budget lines for all those activities are in the ordinance. This ordinance, as I said, was modeled on the Albany ordinance. One thing they have in Albany is a partnership with the Albany Law School, where professors and students in the law school help their commission with some of its investigations and workups of its recommendations. And we have a proposal as part of as a separate ordinance. There are three ordinances. One is the main ordinance setting up the commission. Another is the ordinance encouraging the city attorney to drop charges in appropriate instances. And the third ordinance is to explore a relationship with the MSU Law School. We're thinking that there may be some students at MSU who could provide some work on some of the investigations and reports that the commission is tasked to do, and at the same time would profit from learning about how a police department works. That is a kind of an overview of the information and the recommendations mechanism that the ordinance contains. And let me say a little bit about the complaint mechanism. As I said earlier, there's one of our constraints comes from the collective bargaining agreement, and the collective bargaining agreement has a lot to say about the disciplinary actions that the police chief takes against individual police officers. And we tried to stay away from that. And we tried to work in our complaint system in the interstices where we can do work without courting a lawsuit. So the police department manages its employees. It investigates its employees, looking into the adequacy of their performance. And the commission does not manage the employees and does not investigate its employees. What the commission does is to manage the complaint system when members of the public or the commission itself file complaints about the police department. And it's important to note that we have two or three kinds of complaints. There's a disciplinary complaint, there's a policy complaint, and then there's a purely internal complaint. So a member of the public is complaining about a police officer or complaining about something that happens to him. May want the officer fired or may want the police department to change the way it does business. If I want, if I have a bad experience in a traffic stop, you know, I may want this guy fired, or I may want the police department not to stop me under these conditions, you know, just because I have a Christmas tree hanging from my rear view mirror or something. So the complaint that a member of the public brings can be either an employment complaint, framed as an employment complaint, or it can be framed as a policy complaint. If it's framed as an employment complaint, it goes into this black hole of the collective bargaining agreement. The information you get about that complaint is very limited. You have very little control over the outcome of that complaint. But if the complaint is policy driven, if the complaint is about the policy or practice of the department, it's much more out in the open, and you can follow the adjudication of the complaint. You can make more thorough recommendations about the outcome of the complaint. And then there's a third category of complaints that are purely internal. The police officer takes too long a lunch, doesn't fill out his timesheet, correctly. The management wants to take some kind of a disciplinary action against the officer that has nothing to do with a member of the public. So those are purely internal purely internal complaints. So we have policy complaints, we have disciplinary complaints involving members of the public, and we have these internal complaints. In the ordinance, the Police Oversight Commission makes recommendations regarding policy complaints and regarding disciplinary complaints. The commission controls, manages, has power over where people can file complaints. It will write, it has control over the form of the complaint. It can generate complaint forms that people will use. And it controls the complaint tracking process. So all complaints, no matter what kind, the police department is obligated in the ordinance to report that monthly. I think it's monthly to the commission, and say a little bit about what the complaint involves, what the status is. Now, the police department conducts its own investigation of all these complaints. The police department will assign an investigation to the staff. The staff conducts an investigation, and then the staff presents the result of the investigation to the police chief. And it's the police chief who makes the final decision about what disciplinary action will happen. Between the time the staff has completed its investigation and the time the police chief makes his decision about what shall happen, that's when the commission makes its recommendation. So it makes a recommendation in that space between the staff investigation and the police chief's decision on disciplinary action. One of the things, one of the things that happens if we are talking about a policy complaint is that if the police department finds a policy issue that needs to be addressed or corrected, it is required to produce a corrective action report. And that's one of the things that distinguishes the employment disciplinary action from a policy complaint. So the commission can criticize the corrective action report, and the commission can ask for more investigation on any particular point of the staff investigation report. If there's a disagreement, the commission can ask the police chief to conduct more investigation. If the police chief is reluctant to do so, then the commission can seek through the city council opportunity to hire its own investigator, following that Albany model. One of the features of the complaint process is that complaints at a couple or 3 points can be switched from the personnel disciplinary track to the policy track. If the complaint is filed, it goes to the first to the police chief, and the police chief will decide whether this is a policy complaint or a employee disciplinary complaint. When the investigation is completed, the commission, one of the recommendations the commission can offer is that this complaint should not be treated as an employee disciplinary complaint. It's not about whether a person should be fired or disciplined. This is a matter of policy. And we want you to reinvestigate this issue from the policy standpoint. The commission can make that recommendation. So there are a number of types of recommendations that the commission can make in response to the police staff investigation of a complaint. In the case of disagreement between the police chief and the commission is empowered to appeal to the city manager. And the city manager will issue a report, a decision in writing. And I think that's where the commission's power stops. Unless we have a amendment to the city charter, city manager's decision is going to be the final decision, at least with respect to policy complaints. Employee disciplinary complaints, the arbitrator is going to be making the final decision. I mentioned that the issue of de-escalation and the 911 calls. Police have a monopoly on the use of force when they encounter people in their work, and sometimes forces may be the use of force may be the only skill they can bring to an encounter, and they may be too quick to escalate to violence, as we have seen in too many cities. And so there's rather than relying on police officers' internal discipline to de-escalate situations, we thought it beneficial to explore the possibility of calling in professionals in human behavior who might have a larger repertoire of for dealing with people. To that end, we have not only empowered the commission to explore the 911 system and see if organizations like community mental health can be put on the roster as first responders to some situations, but we have in section 3 of our ordinance arranged to propose to have 2 social workers placed on the commission. And I guess the final major mechanism that I wanted to stress was the evaluation in is it section 12? We provide for an evaluation under the control of the city council every 4 years. And as you look back over the years, look around at all the cities who have put these citizen review boards and police oversight commissions into operation. The best ones are the ones who have changed over time. And the way you change over time is by continually updating and evaluating your performance. So we call for the city council to, not the commission itself, but the city council to evaluate the performance of the commission every 4 years. That's my overview of the ordinance, and I think it would make a lot more sense if we had a conversation about it rather than letting me go on and on about things that you may or may not be interested in.
I appreciate the acknowledgement, and I appreciate all the work that went into that. For right now, I'm going to open this up to questions from the council. Keep in mind that we will be having a further discussion on this item June 15th at our next discussion only meeting. But if you have any immediate questions that you'd like to ask now, please feel free. All right, I'll start with one. And this can be a question that's answered maybe even later if there's not an immediate answer. But in section 3, you talk about commission members. And I think the appointment process is really important. And it's really vital in the first appointment process, just given the fact that, generally with city commissions, we have communication between whoever the liaison from the city council is. Of course, commission appointments are made by the city council and, members of that commission. Of course, there aren't members of that commission right now because this is new. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more perspective. Again, this can be email after or even in comment next week on what you envision that process to be like, at least from the city perspective. Of course, council can, release applications and receive them and then make determinations at that point. But, I probably think the better approach would be to have members of the study committee, or at least a couple of members of the study committee in the process for appointments. That way we make sure we're putting the right people on board. So I'm just looking for a little bit of guidance on what you guys envision that for, of course, because also study committee members can be members of this commission too. So that's kind of a weird balance, but I do think it's important to acknowledge. And of course, you guys give a little bit of guidelines as to what you want to see, how many members, who those members might make up for, and where you want to see representation. But the actual appointment process itself is really important. And I want to make sure that that's not done necessarily like in a vacuum. So that would be kind of my first question. If anybody has any immediate responses to that, I'm more than happy to hear them, but I'm also more than happy to hear them next week if you give a little bit more time to think. It's okay too.
Thank
you. You went through a process. You went through a process to put people on this study group. And that's probably a good start of that process.
Yeah, I mean, again, more than happy to kind of facilitate it through the council in an easy way. My only acknowledgement was that this is the first iteration of this, right? Or if this passes, this will be the first iteration of this. And this commission had a vision. And I want that vision to be acknowledged in the best way. So if there were, interjections that members of this commission might be able to, put. So if we had, council liaison, right, maybe Councilmember Bacon, because he was the liaison to the study committee, make recommendations to the full council after interviews with applicants. Does that mean that, Chair Grigsby is in that room as well during those interviews or other things like that? That was more my question. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may just touch upon that. So when we were appointed for this commission, the diversity of applicants we had and skill sets from that. And so there is a great wealth of people in the community that would be well qualified, I think, to participate going forward. And I just have a humble suggestion when it comes to the appointment process, kind of like what happened this summer, have it be an open process in the public format if it is going to be done through council's lead direction, would be my humble suggestion, because that way, there you go with having it be transparent to the community, having them involved in a way where they can talk about that. And then all the people who would like to participate on that have an opportunity to present themselves to the public in a way that I think would be very, very good in getting that credibility on the oversight. So I just say that as a small suggestion and an idea for you to think about. And that's all I really had to that specific question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I understand it. I don't know the practicality of having, similar to, having public meetings in regards to this, but I understand where you're getting at. I appreciate it. My next question might be a question for staff, but it's on the budget. Mr. Williams had indicated a couple of things in regards to budget, as well as, I believe, Dr. Hero, and just the allocation of funds and then the use of funds for like research purposes or hiring an investigator. I'm interested to know if we allocated funds towards this commission beforehand, would it still need to go through council if they were to utilize those funds? I'm just trying to figure out or understand a little bit more about that.
Hey, Mayor, we'll have to do some research and get back to you on that, okay?
That's all right. Yeah, we've done that in the past where Arts Commission is a perfect example where they have a certain budget, but you still see some things on the council agenda come forward. So I appreciate a little clarification. And then in terms of the 911 emergency system, you guys mentioned that a few times. And I think obviously acknowledging that it's through the county, right? And the necessity there. Did you envision that this would be kind of a conversation that the commission would approach over time, or is that something that we need to approach before something this is passed, right? So is this a directive for the commission going forward to interact with the county, maybe the Board of Commissioners or other folks that are on that staff? Or is this something that we need to acknowledge before passage of this to make sure that that connection is made?
It's not immediate. It's a long process that involves several jurisdictions and private organizations. So you don't do that. Don't wait to start your commission before that's in place.
No, I'm not trying to say we wait until then. I was more just saying that it had said make recommendations to this system that of course is not under our jurisdiction, right? And so acknowledging the fact that that is necessary and that is important, I want to make sure that commission still has the ability to do so. And that's a long-term thing. That's a long-term thing. But yeah.
One of the people who we had speak to us. One of the groups that we had speak to us was the state administrator of CMH and the Ingham County CMH people. So they are good resources. If you'd want to talk to them, you get an idea of what's already in place, what they would need, and what the territory looks like.
And then my last question is kind of just a little bit for the city attorney. The last ordinance they had drafted indicated kind of a directive for the city manager to reach out to the MSU School of Law on this. I was just wondering if an actual ordinance or resolution would be necessary to do that.
Well, I don't think an ordinance is necessary, but we can look into I think more of a policy resolution would be appropriate.
Okay. All right. Great. Those are my immediate questions. I might have some more for discussion in the future at our next meeting. It is getting to 10 p.m. here. We got a little bit more on the agenda. But yeah, go ahead, Chair Grisby.
Yeah, just real quickly, we've been doing this for quite some time, as you know, and the whole city collective has been. I just wondered if there was, outside of people that have already maybe made a comment about what they've seen so far, their thoughts, they like what they see, do they like to see most of this stuff going forward? I know there's going to be more discussion, but is there any immediate reactions before you cut us loose in regards to the presentation tonight and the draft that you have overall, if anything?
It's a great segue into my next comment. I do have some, but I do want to make sure that I'm giving one last opportunity for questions for members of council. So I'll do that.
Can I? I was wondering if this changes what the Human Rights Commission does, because I didn't see them mentioned like in the complaints part. And so I was just wondering how you see your relationship with the Human Rights Commission going forward with this, how this new group, if they even would have a relationship.
If I may, yes, and any of the commissioners can jump in on this, but as we were, having liaisons go into the study commission from the HRC, myself being one of them, we knew that this process was going to go in this direction, and it's supported by the body of the HRC. And we had brief discussions about that, and we are there to help facilitate that transfer of responsibilities and be involved as much as we can. But ultimately, this will be something that will be in the purview, from my perspective, in the purview and the mandate of the Police Oversight Commission, and the HRC will be doing some different things within their body of work. So I hope that answers your question.
Other questions? Yeah.
I don't have a question per se. I thought this was extremely thorough. I think, yeah, I guess I do have one question, which is just there was a suggested budget allocation within this, but I also realized that some of the things research and investigators can get quite expensive. So I was kind of wondering, and then also, there were some things about, not having charges for things that would typically have been related to FOIA within the police department. And obviously, of course, those FOIA charges are related to staff time. And so there was a recommendation of making sure that the council compensated if there was an excessive amount of expense racked up in terms of some of those things. I was just kind of wondering if we need to, I guess what the question would be, what happens if the study committee, or not the study committee, but the oversight committee exceeds that budget? Do we have kind of a sense of what happens if they run out of money and then we have to do like a budget amendment, I guess? Or like, I wouldn't want the work to stop right because the money ended. I think we just have to figure out how to make sure that there's some sort of plan B, I guess, in terms of funding some of these extra duties. So I guess it's not really a question, it's kind of a comment that maybe we could think about before our discussion tomorrow or next week. And then I just mostly wanted to congratulate you guys on a huge body of work and a very clear document, which is clearer than I ever could have imagined coming out of. You guys really just had an incredible task set before you, and I'm incredibly pleased in the form that it has come to us. So my congratulations to all of you for all of your hard work. Much appreciated.
And I'll probably give a similar reaction in a second, but I do want to kind of expand on one of the questions that the Mayor Pro Tem asked, and maybe get a little bit more insight into, in your budget, you listed out obviously the 5 categories in terms of research and evaluations, investigations, and complaints. Obviously, those FOIA costs or the costs of staff time to actually obtain information, other things like that. Is that what you are envisioning that money would be used to allocate for, or is that in addition to the possible staff costs that might be necessary to receive information?
I think, frankly, we didn't go into the money too much. We had an estimate of the global costs based on what other cities pay for their commissions, but we didn't get into the weeds of budgeting. None of us. We are great experts on various things, but none of us is an expert on budgeting.
It's okay. I don't think anybody ever becomes a true expert on budgeting except for Jill Feldbush. But I appreciate that. The The only thing was I'm not necessarily talking about the merit of the gathering of information, more just the costs associated with an understanding that you put a budget out that, you know, seems to make sense for me in terms of the breakdowns. But I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit deeper into what those breakdowns actually meant. So I'll ask maybe a follow-up question to that is if the costs per se are not to be, when you had indicated costs for you know, requesting information are not to be reflected on the commission, is that is that acknowledgement that it wouldn't be reflected on the commission's budget? Or yeah, I'm just trying to understand kind of where the money is going necessarily.
Well, there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
Somebody has to pay for it.
Right. And that's a completely valid thing. What I'm trying to get at is that acknowledging 100% that the commission needs to have access to information, while also acknowledging that getting that access to information takes time and staff. And if we're allocating a certain budget towards this commission, is that budget, or can that budget also be utilized to make up for some of that staff time? Or are you envisioning that that budget is in addition to the staff time that might be necessary to get information? So that's maybe a complicated question, so I don't necessarily need the answer to it today, but maybe a follow-up conversation might be necessary. Chris?
I think one kind of response is to remember the importance of the independence of the commission.
Right.
And that the commission and the police department are not the same.
Right.
And so the provision of information by the police is a job of the police department. And so that would be part of the police department budget. You know, how their personnel spend their time. And then what the Oversight Commission does is what would be in the budget of the Oversight Commission. I know there are some cities where after they create an Oversight Commission, they try to figure out and, you know, gradually figure out what the Oversight Commission needs. And they sometimes increase the budget of the data section of the police department. That's just an example, but it's important not to intermingle them.
Yeah, no, that's what I was, that answers the question perfectly. Is are those separate, or are those, you know, similar in the sense?
I think they're separate.
Okay.
And we acknowledge that they both exist.
Yeah. Would you mind giving me a little bit more insight? And so the research and evaluations or investigations and complaints, that would be more either hiring external folks to do so or do that research. Would it be compensating, maybe, again, acknowledging that this commission, and I agree, by the way, that it shouldn't be necessarily housed under the police department, acknowledging that this might be utilized for staff of the commission to do that type of research. Is that more what you're envisioning for that kind of, those kind of dollars?
You're asking about the investigative part of the budget?
Yeah, or and the research as well. Just to expand a little bit more so I can understand a little bit more.
I think we were. Tell me if I'm off base here, but I think we were talking about a professional researcher.
Okay.
And not somebody who would be the staff of a commission. You know, we're talking about somebody like Cedric Thoreau.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Right.
Yep, that answers my question. I appreciate that. All right. Any other council member questions, or I just give general comments? Going once, gone twice. All right. At the request of Chair Grigsby, I'll say, you know, a little bit about what I said before. This is an incredible lift. And I'd just like to acknowledge that this is not only a very thorough document, but it's also a document with backup for basically every single thing that you have in it, which is important. And I think that this conversation has needed to happen for many, many years. And I'm glad we're having it now. I'm proud to be on the council that's having it now, and I'm even prouder of this commission. I think that when we were going through the process of appointing the right people to this commission, it was with the vision that we were basically giving you an impossible task. And we needed people in place and the staff of the city in place to try to accomplish that impossible task. And I'm sure that, there are going to be nitpicky things here or there, and there's going to be a lot of input over the next couple of weeks. But I'd just like to acknowledge that this is incredible work. I think that this ordinance, the ordinances are very well thought out. I think they're drafted accordingly. I think they understand the restrictions and the constraints, but also understanding the necessity, and gives the commission what I believe is the necessary amount of oversight, as well as the ability to create longevity in terms of police reform. And that's really one of the big things that I have wanted to see, is that this council, of course, has passed policy, and our chief has done a lot to influence policy and change things throughout our police department. But what we need is a commission that's going to be there for the long term, that's going to address issues in the future, that's going to continue to address policy questions that will take years to figure out the solution to, because these are not easy answers. These are not easy questions. And I think that this draft proposal does that. And that is why overall I'm very supportive of it. I might have individual questions about certain sections, but overall this is very, very, I think this will be very beneficial to the community. And I'm looking forward to voting yes on something like this in the near future. So we're going to have a further discussion on it on the council table in the next few weeks, where I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit more details, but I'll say my initial reaction is great job. So, other council members have anything initial? Go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, and I know just from watching the process, I'm also thankful for all the things that didn't seem accomplishable. I know you left a lot of breadcrumbs and things within the document to allow for an evolution down the road for the CD Commission. I really appreciate that. And I'm really hopeful that this, like I said, I call it kind of a living document. I'm hopeful it becomes just part of our DNA as a community, that this CD Commission, blends right in and just becomes part of how we do business. And I think everyone that was part of this commission will look back and have a lot of pride at how this all goes. I know every single element and every exact iteration that we all wanted was not attainable in some ways, or even practical, but I think we'll all look back in the very near future and understand just what a big deal this was. And knowing how East Lansing responds to change, we'll be a model for other places. They'll be coming to ask us how we did this, and how it's evolved, and how can they iterate their processes. So I appreciate this, and just understanding some of the frustrations and things were worth it. And this will iterate and will grow and be something that you'll be able to tell the next generation about what you did. So I'm just really proud to have had any role in that. And I made every effort to not put my thumb on the scale, and a lot of things occurred that I really wanted to occur without me having any much input or trying to impact the process. So thank you guys, and for allowing me to participate and attempt to remain impartial. And it was an amazing process, and you guys did a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. My comments will be brief because I have been in this chair for about 14 hours today.
Councilmember Babcock, I'm sorry, we can barely hear you.
My comments will be brief because I've been in the same chair for about 14 hours today, and my back is in incredible pain. But I want to thank you for your very hard work. As you know, I'm not one to lack comments, so I will comment more later. Simply, thank you very much.
Great. All righty. Thank you for being with us here today, and we'll see you probably next week. All right. Our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. I will hand this over to Acting City Manager House.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. On tonight's consent agenda, we have item 4.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. A, Amy Zaagman to the East Lansing Public Library Board of Trustees for a full term ending June 30th, 2026. Oluwatob Williams to the East Lansing Arts Commission for a partial term ending December 31st, 2021. 4.2, approval resolution acknowledging Pride Month. 4.3, approval resolution opposing House Bill 4722 and Senate Bill 446. 4.4, approve a change of the June 15th regular meeting to a discussion only meeting. Item 4.5, approve of revision to the existing policy resolution 2012-5, the public property naming resolution, including a set of instructions for future ad hoc committees as recommended by the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. Item 4.6, approve the authorization of $400,000 of the remaining contingency funds of the fiscal year 2019 state revolving fund loans to the Water Resource Recovery Facility Biosolids Improvement Project. Item 4.7, approve a resolution authorizing Dean Kelly to purchase 1 year and 7 months of service credit from the Municipal Employees Retirement System. Item 4.8, approve a contract with Overhead Door Company to replace an overhead door at the Water Resource Recovery Facility and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.9, approve a 1-year renewal agreement with Helping Hands Respite Care, formerly known as Lab Respite Care, for the provision of adult day services at the Valley Court Community Center and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.10, approve an agreement with Hubble Roth and Clark Incorporated for engineering services associated with the fiscal year 2022 major street improvements on Bircham Drive in an amount not to exceed $178,275.50 and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.11, approve allocating up to $10,000 of marijuana excise funds to support the efforts of Mid-Michigan Expungement Clinic coordinated by 54B District Court. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for your consideration.
Thank you, Acting City Manager. Would anybody like any item taken off put on the business agenda? All right, not seeing any. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Great.
Second.
All right, motion by Mayor Pro Tem Greg, seconded by Councilmember Bacon. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Great. We are now on to our business agenda, and we only have one item on the business agenda today, which is consideration of policy resolution 2021-7 and ordinance number 1500, resolution to adopt an ordinance. It's the lease renewal ordinance. I'm not going to read all that because it's fairly late. So I am the staff contact on this. I am the one that brought this ordinance up a little while ago. At this point, we've heard from many members of the public on this, both for and against the issue. As you will note that this is a little bit different than the previous ordinance that you saw with the acknowledgement of a draft. Oh, go ahead.
I just probably wanted to acknowledge the expungement dollars that were in there in case because there was an actionable thing in there for the dollars that are in there in case people who the dollars were prohibitive to some people. Can I speak to that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
We allowed some funding for the expungement clinic that's coming up here. It was presented to us that some of the dollar amounts for some people were prohibitive for them to participate in there, even the $100, $50, and some of the different fees in the fee schedule to participate. There are some dollars that will be that are present via the marijuana fund that will be allocated for expungement clinic. So that will be something that will be accessible, and I just want to make sure that people knew that. So don't allow the if those dollar figures are prohibitive to you, please look into or ask about how to participate with some of those funding dollars to make sure you're not able to access the expungement clinic. It's too important. That was all.
Thank you very much. Very important point. Alrighty, I will continue on item 5.1. You'll note that the change to this ordinance and resolution that was made was, and you'll see in section 5, is the ordinance shall take effect on August 10th, 2021, conditioned on the city of Lansing and Meridian Township adopting ordinances that are substantially similar. The reason why I wanted to put this amendment in is because I believe that really the only argument that I have seen is very, very valid is that if we're imposing a restriction on our own folks here, and there is a rental market surrounding us, of course, we've seen the breakdown of where students live, and it is split fairly evenly between these three municipalities as to off-campus living, that we're putting our own local business owners at a disadvantage versus other surrounding communities. that might be able to push these in a more direct way before our own folks could. And so as you'll see in the add-on written communication, there is an acknowledgement from Trustee Dan Opsimer from Meridian Township that they're working on something similar. And we haven't had anything written from Lansing City Council members, but myself, ASMSU, Councilmember Watson, and also members of the Meridian Township have been in communication with a few Lansing City Council members regarding this, and we are hopeful that we might see something formally fairly soon, at least discussed. And so what this basically does is say that it doesn't go into effect unless both of those municipalities pass something similar, which I think addresses probably a good amount of the issues in terms of competition. Everybody, I'm not going to belabor the point that you heard from students today, but I do believe this is a vote for students. And I believe that if this passes, we are going to significantly impact a population that has not been taken advantage of by local businesses, but by a market where local businesses have to push this early. And so I think this is a good ordinance. I think this is an impactful one. And I think that this is something that'll help people in our community for many, many years to come. So that's my pitch. And I'm more than happy to take questions and or have an open discussion about it. Feel free to just chime in. You don't need to get acknowledged by me.
Hi, I'll start. I have many reservations about this proposed ordinance, but for me, making a City of East Lansing ordinance contingent on what other local units of government does is an absolute no-go. Either we pass this because we believe it's right for East Lansing and we want it to happen, or we don't because we don't want it to happen. But pinning East Lansing's right to govern ourselves on what happens in a neighboring community is just poor policy and poor governance. We have done regional things before, and how we've done those, most recently the coal tar sealants, excuse me. Meridian passed it, we passed it. We had these conversations, government to government, and we all agreed on mutual points of agreement. I cannot put the city in a position of will it happen, won't it happen, depending on what others do. So I will absolutely not support that version of this ordinance because I just don't think that's how we ought to operate as a council. So I'm not dressing this up much. As I said, I've been in this chair for about 14 hours and my back's killing me, so I'm not being overly gracious, but I just think this is not a good way to operate. Thank you.
So are you supportive of the ordinance without that amendment?
Probably not. Probably not. I have a lot of other misgivings, but when I saw the new version come through, I was like, that's not what the city council does. We make the decision, the policy decision for the city or not. So.
Other folks? Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to mention that I received an email in the interim post public comment from a landlord who was not able to call in because he had a family emergency in the middle of the call-in. And I wanted to, I can represent his comments independently if the rest of the council agrees that that's appropriate. So this was Joe Goodser as a representative of CRMC. I should also probably mention that he owns the building that my store is in, but I'm representing his opinion, not as his tenant. It's a little bit complicated. He wanted to, I think, primarily point out that MSU is not being held to these policies in there, and I think specifically in the 1855 place, since that's the apartment part of their rental. And then let me just make sure. Yeah, I think that's primarily his opposition here. And then just to say that CRMC is opposed to it. Anyway, and that I think the ASMSU representatives talked about a decade's worth of different attempts by that body to kind of bring this to the fore, but that our current overbuilt rental market, his words, not mine, were not in place, and that is going to have a definite effect on who's renting where and when. So, okay, not my comments, but Mr. Goodsir's comments.
Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, I think I was really appreciative of the kind of historical perspective from the member of MSU as well. It was very thorough. I think the challenge with the historical perspective is it's not occurring in a vacuum. There's some really specific market pressures that are taking place, and I can't account for, like the sophomore rule. Many of the issues that were created were by the pace of freshmen kind of moving into that sophomore perspective. I think that's been taken off the table. And then the question of the overbuild, what's that even going to have impact on the market? How much of the market was reset by COVID? There's just so many variables that I have a really tough time accounting for, and I hate to make a decision in a vacuum when that's not what's taking place right now. Along with what I've seen happen in other markets, that not necessarily the date changes, but when you give impact to the market, it tends to consolidate. All it does is consolidate power and eliminate some smaller players who will be less able to manipulate or do whatever they're going to do around the rules. The larger people are going to do what they're going to do around rules. And it's just going to damage the smaller kind of landlord situations, not the big, powerful ones anyway. So from those perspectives, the timing of this rule is bad from my perspective. At this point, I'm a no. Just based on the timing, I understand there are some principles in here and consumer protections that I do support, but it'd have to come back in a little bit different form and a little bit different timing, maybe down the road outside of COVID, and we can analyze the impact and maybe some of the impacts inside of the housing study as well have not yet been critiqued. So from my perspective, I'm a no at this time.
Councilmember Bacon, if I could ask you a question. What do you believe the difference in effect that this will take in terms of disadvantaging smaller landlords versus the bigger ones, as probably the bigger ones would be more able to acknowledge a citywide policy as they're in regular communication?
I think there's always creative ways to do things. I'd be curious even to study in Ann Arbor if the bigger people have just gotten more creative around what they do and what they call things and what they do that. And a guy with one or two properties definitely can't do that. He'll be under the strict scrutiny of the law. I question how it's really interpreted and really used and what the bigger players are able to do to the ordinance down the road anyway, or how they get around it or that kind of thing. And then it'd be an unexpected consequence for the smaller people in there. It's just, the timing, it's just, there's so many things going on, and I don't even know with the number of housing units that are going to come online. I don't know if the market's going to demand anything different. They may be pushed, the market may push them to make a bunch of changes anyway around this. And I think I need more information, a little bit more time. I'm not, it's a good ordinance and a well-produced ordinance. The timing of it is poor under the certain circumstances of right now. So that's all I got for that.
Go ahead, Councilmember Watson.
So I've got a number of notes, and I might skip over some of them because some of them were spoken to by the people that have called in or the people that have written in. But when I look at rental market trends, renting demand is up and home ownership is falling. And so when I think about what's the right thing to do for the city of East Lansing regarding this ordinance, I think about from the landlord's perspective, there's security in getting a lease signed and getting someone to make that commitment. And so that makes sense from a business perspective. And then the supply and the demand that has been brought up. But something that it reminded me of is Black Friday, and how Black Friday at some points turned into Thanksgiving Thursday. Did you guys hear the motorcyclists? Just making sure. And then it turned into late night Wednesdays. So it expanded more and more because it was this big shopping day. And then stores ended up taking some steps back. And so what I'm going back to with the leasing timeframes is it seems to have taken a huge tilt that disadvantages the customer's thoughtful choice process. Rent is typically your highest monthly cost. And I'm kind of opposite in my point of view about why now in the epidemic, that the epidemic highlighted a huge flaw in this system because a number of students have remained screwed over in the past 20 years, but then the epidemic hit and they were even more screwed up. And it's just like, well, how did I get so screwed up about something that's going to happen in the fall? And it's because they had to sign these leases, or they chose to sign these legal binding agreements far in advance of what we knew was going to happen in life. And so signing a lease, sorry, I'm losing track of my notes here. Signing a lease so far in advance is also an interesting concept because we often don't wait that long to reap the benefits of a lease or a purchase. We don't wait that long for a car, for an appliance, for a home, for a laptop, or for an Xbox. Time tells us whether a relationship works with your roommates, with the house that you chose. There's school issues that happen for people. There's hardships. There's reason people change their minds and need something different or something new. And to have made that decision so far in advance, it has continued to put the students in a difficult spot. I think the leasing period in January, February opens the doors for others like families, your grad students, your spring start semester students. And capturing all the juniors happens when they can rent closer to the semester. And so not all juniors are juniors come fall. Some juniors are juniors come spring or the summer. And so their opportunity to rent or take advantage of this isn't happening. It seems like people talk about that we can't just we can't not rent to students. They say we can't create these systems. But to me, this system is created where you can only rent to undergrad students because it has to happen so far in advance. And some people get left out of that equation. And so I think about the leg up for those who need to save or wait to receive more money, a chance for changes to occur and people to still have options. I think about families, you all know that, but I think about single young people, other adults who want to stay here, who want to rent here. And it is hard to find a place if it's not fall semester. And so looking at the housing study, looking at our overabundance of housing choices, we talked about it when I was on Planning Commission, just that concern that we were overbuilding. We see homeowners are fighting over these rental overlays. Sophomores are staying on campus. And so to me, the signs are there to make some changes and open some doors up for more people to be able to lease in the city of East Lansing. And so my last comment is, I am with Lisa as far as we're home of Michigan State University, and I see us as leaders. Our percentages of students is way higher. And so for me, I owe it to the people that live in this city or work or go to school to be able to lease in ways that make sense. And so I am in favor of the ordinance overall, whether it's just the city of East Lansing setting examples and having conversations about why we're doing that, or if it's with the other groups that we've mentioned, because it's a return to me to a reasonable time frame. And it also makes space for more diverse renters who want to live here.
I'd just like to kind of touch on a couple of things that Councilmember Watson mentioned, and then kind of an argument that I've heard a lot that I am struggling with. So I hear a lot of examples of things that are changing, and you know, the uncertainty of what this market is going to be, but not a lot of examples about how this actually exacerbates the situation or how this actually negatively impacts people. I think the uncertainty is the fear, and that's valid. But in terms of the policy itself, I don't believe it really holds much merit, because the actual acknowledgement of the policy has been, well, this was what it used to be, right? We used to get our leases out, at the end of the lease, like and I'm a renter. I can say very, very definitively that I'm not living in a student housing area, and I get my lease renewal a couple months before my lease ends. And I would argue any renter anywhere that's not in student housing in this kind of situation has that experience as well. And so this isn't going to impact that market, certainly. But as for that student market, the acknowledgement of, well, it was MSU that pushed up the timeline, or it was Chandler Crossing that pushed up the timeline. Either way, the timeline was there before. We had a system in which leases were signed in the spring, albeit it might have been 30 years ago, but it was there. And it didn't negatively impact folks. And so, the acknowledgement of uncertainty is fine, but as that speaks to the validity of this ordinance, I don't think it holds water, because you're not talking about what this ordinance does and how it'll negatively impact. You're just talking about, we don't know what's going to happen, which I can tell you what's going to happen is that folks aren't going to have to sign their lease until 150 days after. That's what's going to happen. And I think that that's important to acknowledge is that's the only change here. In fact, if you're renting a place and you want to re-sign your lease, you can do it day one, as long as you're the one instigating it. And that's fine. But all this does is push that timeline up. And I appreciate Councilmember Watson's comments and Councilmember Babcock's comments in regards to the surrounding areas. But I do believe that the one issue that I do think that holds water in terms of this is that if we're putting our folks at a disadvantage versus surrounding areas, because while we might have a plurality of off-campus students living in our area, it's certainly not, an overwhelming majority. And I think that needs to be acknowledged with developments that are happening in Lansing and of course in Meridian that have already occurred, that population's there. But again, my bigger point is that this is a good thing for students, and this is what it changes. It doesn't, impact anything other than you have to wait that necessary period. So, other comments, questions? Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm still deeply conflicted, and it looks like I'm going to be at the deciding vote. So that sucks for me. But I guess the question that's forming in my mind is this going to have a negative impact on our landlords, and is it going to have a net positive impact on our students? I don't think that our landlords will see a financial loss due to this. I think that they will have to change the way that they do business somewhat. I think that there's definitely going to be some confusion in terms of leases that start at different times. But I think one of the things that, I don't know, I feel like we have a tendency to treat our students as sort of a captive audience, because we know that they're on their way out. They're here for a brief period of time, and then they're gone, and there's a new batch of them. And I think that in some ways they receive kind of a less dignified place in our community because of that. And that's something that we have a duty to correct. I think every resident of this community, regardless of their economic status, of their student status, of their any kind of defining demographic, is due the same level of human dignity. And I think we do have a population that gets a short shift in that regard, because they're they need a place to live for 4 years, and they're not going to buy a house usually. So there's a big group of people that is essentially kind of without as many choices as other people. And that if we can make their living situation a little bit more dignified, I think we do owe it to them to do that. Those unintended consequences, I guess, are what's really sticking in my mind. I hadn't really thought about until tonight when several landlords brought up the fact that even within their own portfolios, they have different lease signing dates. That definitely seems to add a level of complication. I also am somewhat bothered by the fact that really our only mechanism for enforcing this is going to be if tenants essentially rat out their landlords. I actually have a different view on that from Councilmember Bacon. I actually think the small landlords are going to have an easier time of that because they have less tenants. So if it's up to the tenants to report it, I think the small landlords are going to be in a better position because, they're only renting 20 beds as opposed to, 1,500 beds, which some of our people are. So, it opens an avenue where a tenant could file a grievance against their landlord just because they were irritated. And I always hate it when we open up doors like that. I don't think that will happen, but it's a possibility. I also, kind of disagree with Councilmember Babcock's assessment. I think that, yes, we're legislating for East Lansing, but one of the things that I've had reinforced to me over and over again in the last month with my conversations that I've been having in regards to business incubation are just the fact that we are a region. Our residents don't know when they've crossed a boundary, and we only know when they've crossed a boundary because we're cashing their property tax checks. So I think that, something like this really only works if it's done regionally, and that we owe, we need to make sure that we're doing right by our student residents, but we also need to make sure that we're not disadvantaging our landlords. And if we were to put something in place like this with no guarantee that the surrounding communities would follow, then that really would actually have a pretty substantial and immediate financial impact on our property renting businesses. And I don't think we can do that to them. So the only format that I would support this in is the format which is contingent on the other communities. And then I guess I just have to figure out if I'm willing to live with those unintended consequences.
Sure. If I could respond to one thing before I go to Councilmember Babcock, are you okay with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. I just want to make the acknowledgement that at this point we don't have anything here to protect folks, right? And so I'm not saying that this is a perfect system, but what I'm saying is we don't have anything to build off of. And so if our acknowledgement is that we want to see this change or we need to make amendments later down the line, I'm more than happy to do that based on what we feel our experience is, whether it's in reporting or it's in, the avenues for how these actually get addressed. The point is right now, we don't have anything, right? This is happening and it continues to happen and it won't stop happening until something like this is in place. And it's kind of unfortunate, truly, because, you have a situation where there are a lot of incredibly dedicated business owners in this community that I'm sure would get together and have the agreements that they did before, where it was, let's wait until this day, But it takes one complex that decides not to, that pushes it forward. And now we're in September getting lease renewals, or we're in 30 days in to your July lease asking roommates if you want to live together the next year when you haven't even moved in yet, right? We're at a point where, unfortunately, we've tried to let the market figure it out for decades. And what the market has figured out is that it needs to be very, very early on in a lease period. And our job as elected officials is to address, yes, absolutely invest and make sure that we are doing things according to individual rights, but also address when that market becomes disadvantageous to the ones that it's supposed to be helping. And I think that this is what that does. Councilmember Babcock, go ahead.
You're muted, Lisa.
Okay. Clearly, it's been a long night. Some of us are all over the place. Most of us are all over the place. We started this discussion at 10:22. We have 3 different proposals. I would respectfully request that we table this item until June 22nd.
You can make a motion.
In fact, I will make a motion.
I-
I move that we table item 5 until the meeting of Tuesday, June 22nd. Do I hear a second? The roar of silence.
I can second.
Okay. I do have a comment on this, if the motioner will acknowledge that. I'm not going to be in favor of tabling this. I think we need to make a decision today on the issue. So I'm going to be voting no on the motion to table. And probably after that, I'll be making a motion to approve one of these ordinances. I think that this has been discussed. I think that we've had enough time for the public to weigh in. And I think that the avenue for this has been discussed. And I think we're either for it or we're against it at this point. And especially given the fact that kind of sets a timetable, at least one of the versions sets a timetable out for getting other folks on board with it in the surrounding areas. I think that it needs to, we either need to start this process and take the first step as East Lansing as a region, or we need to acknowledge that it might not happen here at this point. So I'll be voting no on the motion to table. Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of tabling the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion fails 2-3, I believe. So I will now make a motion to approve ordinance 1500 and the subsequent resolution, the ordinance that includes section 5, which dictates that it'll take effect on August 10th with the conditions of City of Lansing and Meridian Township. Mr. Homier, is that an acceptable motion?
It is. I would say that it is. Let me go back up. So you've got policy resolution 21-7. So the motion is to adopt the motion is to approve the resolution, adopt an ordinance to amend section 6175 of chapter 6 of the Code of City of East Lansing.
Yes.
But that version that is attached as Exhibit A is that version with an effective date as stated in section 5 of August 10, 2021, and conditioned on City of Lansing and Meridian Township adopting ordinances imposing substantially similar requirements.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that I believe Exhibit A is actually referring to the one where the section 5 is the ordinance shall take effect immediately, which is why I didn't refer to Exhibit A. I'm more than happy to do so if I am mistaken, but.
It's the same resolution. We're just swapping out the different version, the amended ordinance as Exhibit A.
Okay, great. As long as it's acknowledged that that's the version that I'm motioning for. Appreciate that. Is there a second on that motion?
I can second.
Great. And there's a motion and a second. I do have a motion to amend the policy resolution. And I'll ask for our city attorney's help on this one. In the policy resolution under the now therefore, there is an item 3 that says the ordinance is immediately effective upon date of publication. Will we need to change that to further clarify what the newer version has in it?
Yeah, we will. So the ordinance, we can put in there that the ordinance is effective pursuant to section 5 of the ordinance.
Great. I'll make a motion to amend that replaces under the now therefore clause under the policy resolution, section 3, changing from the ordinance is immediately effective upon the date of publication to the ordinance is effective condition. Sorry, what was that verbiage one more time?
Pursuant to section 5 of the ordinance or Exhibit A.
Okay, pursuant of what the city attorney said. I'm sorry, it's been a long night.
It's all right.
Is there a second on that amendment?
I'll second.
Okay, great. Second by the Mayor Pro Tem. Any discussion on the amendment? I'll just say it's just to keep it consistent. If we're gonna pass the policy resolution and the ordinance dictating the effect, then I want to just keep it consistent. All right, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Great. And I just want to acknowledge, did anybody vote in the negative for that? I think I cut out there for a sec. Okay, great. That passed unanimously. We are now on to the main motion as amended. I think we have talked this thing to death. Does anybody have any further comments on this issue? Great. I'll acknowledge that this passes tonight. This won't go into effect immediately. This will only really go into effect if we get the two surrounding municipalities on board. I think this is a good thing for East Lansing. I will be voting yes for the many reasons that I've described beforehand. All right, I'll ask the clerk to do a roll call vote on this one.
Councilmember Babcock?
No.
Councilmember Bacon?
No.
Councilmember Watson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Greg?
Yes.
Mayor Stevens?
Yes. All righty, with a vote of 3-2, that ordinance and resolution passes. That was our last item on the agenda tonight. Thank you for being with us. We will see you next week.
Sorry about the moth attack. Bye.
Have a good one.